So we are recording this. Anything you say and do will remain. And I'm gonna hand things over to Toby in a minute, but we wanted to go through some Zoom features before he starts to just make sure that you'll be able to see everything he wants. So right now on your screens, you should see his first slide, which is the robot game deep dive, and then a small video inset where you can see Toby. Does everybody see that? Can you, you can either chat a yes so I can see that. Nina, it looks like you're on your phone, so you'll have to listen. I'm curious if you can, if you're watching video on your phone. Oh, good, Emily can see. So what I want folks to try and practice doing is just moving Toby around. So put him under the city, move that little screen around, and make sure you can play around with the different sizes. The 4 icons on the left are to change the size. And then in the upper right of that window, there's a larger white square with a tiny gray square in the upper right. If you click on that, everyone to do that, and someone can let me know what you see.
You might want to unmute for now. So Nina, Emily, and Danielle, or is it Nina or Nina?
It's Nina. I just unmuted, and I can see your slide, and I can see the little box with you in it from my phone.
And were you able to switch them so that the Toby's video gets larger? That's what he's going to do, some video where he shows the field. And so it's just going to be useful for you to be able to make the video, the field larger and his slides smaller at different points during the presentation.
And that way I don't have to toggle the sharing of the presentation on and off, and people can sort of choose to see the larger video or the larger presentation. So for instance, as a demonstration right now, if I were presenting, you'd probably want to see the presentation large and me small. But if I were to do this, and hopefully you can still see video, and then I were to do this, you might at that point want the video to be larger because the presentation wouldn't be as important at that point, and watching me do things like this might be more important.
Okay, yes, I have the capabilities to do all that. I don't have the capabilities to write a text, I don't think, so I'll just unmute if I have a question.
And for me, unmuting is easier because I don't know, I don't have, since I'm mostly going to be presenting from the notebook, I'm probably not going to have the chat screen open that large because that would interfere with your ability to see, well, and for me to see the presentation I'm referring to.
And
so
I'll say,
unmuting is,
with only a couple people on, that it'll be fine to unmute and just ask questions. So I think everybody should feel free to unmute.
Yeah. And I'm going to bump my volume up a little because y'all are a little quiet. Let's try that. If someone can speak. Oh, Becca muted herself.
Oh, I did. I didn't want to be the only one talking. And I have, my son just started playing hockey right above me, so it might get loud in this room.
No problem. Okay, I just was adjusting my volume level, so that helped. Okay. Should we wait a little longer? Should we get started?
No, I think we should get started.
Okay. So you can see this slide. I'm going to jump to the next one. Everyone can see the slides? Yes? I'm assuming if you can't see the slides, unmute and say so. And I'm going to go ahead and jump to the next slide. So who am I? I've been a coach of the Wolf Bites for 5 years now. Well, this is my 5th year. What do I do? I'm a database administrator. By the way, you probably know my name. I'm Toby. I knew I was an engineer at the age of 7 when I discovered what engineers did. And I'm also a passionate, pragmatic programmer. I like a bunch of different languages. Mostly these days as a database admin, I write in SQL, which I actually really like because it's more imperative. You declare what you want, and then your job is trying to trick the system into giving you what you want efficiently, and thinking about how you say what you want can affect how fast it responds. I'm fascinated by all levels of programming, from the hardware to the user interface. So that's pretty much that. Who are you? So we might just start and go from Nina, Emily, and John, and looks like there's 2 Emilys now. Sorry, Nina. Nina, are you rookie coach? You're muted now.
Okay, there I am. No, we had a team last year, so this will be our second year for the team. And then I've done Lego League Junior program for the last 4 years. So I've kind of had an introduction to first with that. But this will be my second year with an FLL team.
And Emily, and I got a bunch, but everyone can sort of go through. I'm curious, is there a mix of rookie coaches? Is everyone, this is at least their second year? That kind of thing is just useful for me to know.
I am brand new. This is my first year, and I have over 20 kids that showed up to the first 6 meetings. We've now dwindled to just barely 20, so the district approved a second team. So I'm going to be coaching 2 teams my first year, yay. But it's been fun so far. We haven't gotten started with, we've just barely started playing with the Legos, getting the robot building going, and they're learning how it works, and they're having a great time.
That's a good place to start, by the way, is not trying to solve all the missions first, but just playing with the Legos. Next.
This is the other Emily, and I'm a rookie coach, brand new this year to FLL.
Okay.
I've got a team of 8 kids in Antioch.
Wow. That's cool. And John or Danielle?
Yeah, so this is Jerry Deal. I'm using my husband's computer.
Okay.
Cool. Yeah, so we've had the Siberian Huskies at the Academy Charter School in Palmer, Alaska for 4 years, but every year starting off feels like a rookie coach experience. It seems like I'm learning all the time. We had a very good team, strong with 8th graders last year, but we lost 5 of them, so our team is down to 2, and 1 kid just got injured, so our team is down to 1. But we have we separate our we separate our club into freshman and senior. We have several freshmen who are going to move up into the club once they meet their certain criteria. So we got about 12 kids, but only 2
awesome.
of them. Yes.
And this is Becca. I'll share. Danielle is she doesn't have audio, so she's just chatting, but she's a second-year coach.
Okay.
And she's from Fairbanks and has a pretty strong team up there too.
Okay, so that's going to sort of cover these questions. And I'm just going to sort of assume a mix of technical and non-technical background, probably more, my guess is more non-technical than technical, just meaning whether you're a person who works with as a programmer or an engineer or something like that. Because it's one of those things that always surprises me. Like, I'm a geek, so I assume that other coaches are geeks, and I have to rein that assumption in sometimes. I would sort of normally do this as a show of hands in the room. I'm going to assume a mix of people who have got their mission models built and ones that haven't built their mission models at all yet. So luckily I have a table with a set of mission models built, and we'll go over that. And in addition, I've built another set. I had the team build a set, and then since I do some of the table validation and setup for the competitions, for the qualifiers and the state competitions, I've started building full sets because that helps me learn the sets inside and out, so I know how to spot errors in sets built by others. So I hate outlines, but we're going to go through rules. We're going to combine table setup with describing the missions because I find that is more valuable than going through all the setup and then worrying about the missions. I was hoping to do mission selection, but since we're sort of taking, as coaches, we've been taking sort of a not just hands-off, but a guidance-off approach with very minimal guidance for our team this year because most of them have been around for a long time and they're 7th graders, and we're sort of letting them stumble with guidance as well. So they haven't really done their mission selection yet, and that means I haven't really thought a lot because they haven't thought a lot about it as to which missions are easier or harder. So that's something that you might want to be thinking about as we go through the missions, and maybe we can just have a informal discussion among all of us afterward. So my first thing, and you'll sometimes see me pointing off here to the right, because that's where I have my notes. So the first thing is understanding the game. I like this as sort of a quick intro. So the first thing is design like an engineer. So one of the things to think about as you're working with your kids is that the engineers identify requirements, they brainstorm solutions, and the other thing that is very valuable for engineers is learning to think in 3D, learning to think about how structures have stress and things like that. Anyway, I'll go through this pretty quickly because it's just sort of generic stuff. Code like a programmer. And good programmers are always searching for the simplest solution that works. So a simple solution that doesn't work isn't very valuable, but they're always hunting for a way of looking at the problem that makes it easier to solve and easier to understand. And so just sort of always be thinking about that in the back of your mind of, I'm focusing on the problem from this angle. Maybe if I look at it from another angle, everything just lines up. And if you can make that jump in your own head, and then you can somehow figure out how to get your kids to make that jump. I know that's probably a stretch. It's a stretch for me much of the time, especially given how, in some ways, restrictive Mindstorms is as a language. I also say plan like a project manager. Engineers love to belittle project managers, but they actually have valuable functions in terms of organizing things and keeping people on schedule and knowing what some sort of not hard deadlines. Your hard deadlines are going to be qualifiers and if you're going to state competitions, but there are lots of informal deadlines that are, you sort of say, hey, when do we want to have X working by? And then this is probably the most important thing on this slide, read like a lawyer. And by that I mean the game guide and the updates, we're supposed to read them as they're written. It's important to keep in, if the rules don't say you need to do X, then you don't have to do X. But if the rules say you need to do Y, then you have to do Y. There may be one sort of exception to that we'll get into later. There's a robot game update that, if I read it like a lawyer, seems to disqualify a lot of missions. I've been in contact with the people who write the rules. They're insisting that no, it's perfectly straightforward and that the missions are still doable, which leads me to believe that I sort of have to come up with my own interpretation of it, but we'll get to that later. I'm hoping that they will clarify those rules as we get on. And finally, for new coaches, you don't have to worry about this, but for coaches that are returning, history can mislead you. Something that was permitted last year may not be permitted this year. Something that was required last year may not be required this year. And there are a lot of changes in the game this year. So it's important for you to know those and for your kids to discover them. And if they don't discover them, for you to think about how to poke them or prod them into discovering them. So one of the things I do, and I'm going to step away for just a second, because somewhere in this room, I have a blue binder. And my blue binder looks like this. And in this binder, I have printed copies of the rules in color, and at the back, I have printed copies of the updates. I do need to get more recent copies printed and in the binder. That's my failing as a coach. But the point is that having a printed copy of the rules that the kids can quickly open and point to and flip through is really valuable when you're working on the robot game. If they have to get on a computer and scroll back and forth, they may be less likely to refer to them.
And I'll chime in for a minute there that everybody has that now in the engineering notebook.
Oh, that's true.
Have a nice
but you can then print the updates and maybe somehow get them into the back of the engineering notebook. Because the updates obviously aren't in the engineering notebook. And yeah, that's another change that was new this year. I found actually flipping through the engineering notebook, and there's also, I forget what it's called, Becca may remember. There's one that's like—
It's the team meeting guide.
Yeah, the team meeting guide. And if you're a rookie coach, I was flipping through that and I'm like, this is a really good thing. It gives you sort of a structure for project management. By this point, you should have X working. It's probably not a bad idea if you're a rookie coach to at least read through that a couple times and think about either following it or adapting it. One point on history can mislead you. 2 years ago, one of our Wolf Bite team members discovered with less than a month before the qualifiers that none of us had noticed that the 12-inch height limit at launch had returned. And they had issues with their robot that were going to cause problems. So that's the sort of history can mislead you thing. Don't assume, always check, and then think about what's different. Okay. So with that, I'm going to launch into sort of I sort of resequence stuff in the game guide and pull stuff in from the updates to go through in a sequence that makes more sense to me. So the first thing is construction. There are 2 critical things on this page from the rules. The first is what you may use. So you can use any Lego-made building parts in their original factory condition. That means you can't cut something off of a plastic piece or otherwise modify the building parts. You can, you're allowed, there is Lego string, and you're allowed to cut the Lego string and tubing and obviously tie knots and string. But you're not allowed to use non-Lego string. Also be aware that there are Lego rubber bands. Lego rubber bands are legal. Non-Lego rubber bands are not legal. Unfortunately, they are not cheap. I think it cost me like $15 for a pack of 30 Lego rubber bands on Amazon. But if you're looking to use rubber bands in your model, that's something that you'll want to acquire. You are allowed to mark parts for identification on hidden areas. I don't know how precise the definition of hidden is. One thing to be aware of, if you've got markings on things that aren't hidden, denatured alcohol works really well for removing Sharpie remarks. There used to be a rule like 5 or 6 years ago that stickers are not allowed except Lego stickers applied per Lego instructions. I've been interpreting Lego-made building parts to exclude the stickers, but I'm not sure how a judge would rule on that. But your safe bet is that you should probably, if you're pulling parts from other Lego kits that kids may have acquired that had stickers, you should probably consider peeling all the stickers off, and then you want to rub any sticky stuff that's left behind off, because that can get in your way. You are not allowed to use, even if they are Lego, the wind-up or pullback motors. I don't know if you've seen like the drag racer models that you pull it back and then zoof, off it goes. You're not allowed to use those. You are not allowed to create or use additional or duplicate mission models. So the set of mission models that comes with the kit is the set you're allowed to use during competition. There's sort of a weird one with mission 11 that we'll get to on that. And finally, and this is a really important one, at tournaments you should expect and design for rare, and I would say they're not always rare, imperfections like changes in light, bumps under the mat. A really critical one to think about with respect to tables is that there is the rules specify a range between 2.5 and 3.5 inches for the height of the table walls. I believe typically, although I'm not sure in other regions, the Alaska tables tend to have the 3.5-inch high walls, which means that if you happen to have a 2.5-inch high practice table and your team is expecting that, and then they come across a 3.5-inch wall, that can sometimes cause issues. So just be aware for that. Okay. So variability. We, meaning the people who set up the competition tables, do our best, but the tables won't be perfect. So you should practice and test with this in mind. One thing you can do is to mess with your table, try other tables. One of the things we sometimes do is partner with another team and say, hey, can we go run our robot on your table and you come run your robot on our table? Be aware that there can be splinters in the border walls. Usually those would be removed. So really what I say when I say border wall splinters can trip you up is that missing things that were border wall splinters that were peeled away can trip you up. So if you have a wheel that's rolling along the wall and there's a divot in the wall, that can cause an issue. So be aware of that. And then, as mentioned before, the table wall heights can vary. So that's all something to be aware of as your kids are designing their robot and then testing their software. So hardware, you're allowed one controller. This just says EV3, also NXT and RCX. I know there's new software out. Becca, does the new software use a different controller, or is it still the EV3 controller? It's just a different software set. Becca stepped away. My understanding based on this is if there is a new controller, you're not allowed to use it. You're only allowed to use the EV3, the NXT, and the RCX. There could be a robot game update at some point on that. The motors, you're allowed to use 4 motors, and that's not 4 motors at one time. You're only allowed to have 4 motors that you bring with you to the table. There are only 4 ports on the brick, so that's not usually a big limitation. But this does mean that if your team is thinking about, oh, we want to put the motor in the attachment and plug and unplug it from the brick, that's fine, but you can't end up with a total of 5 motors or 6 that you bring to the table. You're only allowed the 4. That said, it's also slow to be plugging and unplugging things. You're allowed unlimited sensors, but you only have 4 ports on the brick. And my experience has been that plugging and unplugging sensors can cause issues during competition, so that's probably not a good idea, but it's not specifically forbidden. It's okay to bring a spare controller if you're worried about issues, but you got to go leave it back in the pits. You don't bring it to the competition table. I do recommend if you've got spares, bring them, bring spare cables, bring spare motors and sensors, but leave them in your boxes at the pit. So software, oops, I keep hitting the wrong mouse when I mean to click my other screen. So software, you can use any software that allows the robot to move autonomously, meaning it moves on its own. So you're not allowed to remote control the robot, but there are no restrictions on software this year. So that does technically mean if you've got a group of really advanced kids that wants to hack the brick and stick their own software on the brick and write at low level, technically this says they're allowed to do that as long as there is no remote control going on. So no remote triggering of software, all control of the brick must be done by pushing buttons on the top. I'd say interacting with the sensor out on the field would be, if a human is interacting with the sensor, that's not allowed. We're going to stick with Mindstorm's EV3. So I'm going to start running over the tournament rules. Remember, you get 3 official rounds, so you'll have a practice round and then 3 actual ranking rounds. And in the ranking rounds, it's your best score out of those 3 that counts. So if something goes wrong on 2 of the rounds, but everything goes great on the 3rd round, that's the score that counts for ranking. So bring to the match your full team, up to 10, including 2, and this says designated technicians, but as we'll get to later, you can swap technicians in and out, your robot, and all its equipment. I don't know why it says only if you have more than one there. That's kind of confusing. Obviously, even if you only have one robot, you would want to bring that. I think that only if you have more than one is for the spare robots on the right. And it should have a power pack in it, or you're allowed to use 6 AA batteries. Since our rechargeable batteries have gotten really flaky over the years and Lego charges an arm and a leg for them, we've fallen to using AA batteries from Costco, as wasteful as it is, because it's a lot cheaper than spending $100 plus to get Lego to ship us a new power pack. And Lego wires and converter cables, that's mostly what's part of the robot. So leave behind at the pits, extra controllers, spare robots, all other electronic items. The one thing that isn't mentioned here that I do recommend bringing to the match, we've become big fans of the checklist manifesto. So having a checklist of things you're going to do before you get to the table, and what you're going to do during setup at the table, what you're doing before each launch can be helpful, and that's completely legal to bring. Okay, so into the rules. And a lot of this is old hat for people who've done this before, but if this is your first year, teams, coaches, referees, and all others are expected to model the first core values at all times. So it's important for both the coaches and the teams to be modeling the values. One of the values is that there is no secret sauce in FLL. Sharing is encouraged. Try to set goals that are problem-driven, not opponent-driven. You're not trying to beat your opponent. You're trying to do better on the table. So your focus should be on how do you do better at scoring points during the missions. Kids should do the work. They touch the robot. They interact with the referees. I try to avoid even giving directions during competition. I'll try to stick to asking questions. Is there anything you might have forgotten? Are you sure? Think about all the things you might want, those kind of things. And it's different as the kids get older. Less guidance should be required. As the kids are younger or they're rookies, they may require a bit more guidance. Everyone expects that. What?
I was on one of these video conferences before. This is Jerry Deal. And
Yep.
They mentioned that you could not bring to the table, as in previous years, carts, tubs, things to hold your computer. You have to carry that. Is that correct?
No, you are allowed, and we'll get to that later, you're allowed to bring everything on a cart or in a tub. But, and we'll get to that later, you have to offload everything from it and put the cart or tubs away.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. What they've tried to do, and I think it's really good, historically we've used a cart because it makes a huge difference to have a place to put everything. They've built, and we'll get to it more later, but they've built an area where you put stuff into the table, and that's all the space you're allowed, but everyone sits under the same restrictions.
Okay,
And I think that's really good. So remote control and or data exchange with robots is in the competition area is illegal. So my recommendation is first that you should turn Bluetooth off when you're back on your practice table at some point, and do some test runs with Bluetooth off, just to make sure your robot behaves the same with Bluetooth off as it does with it on, because there's some slight performance improvements when you turn Bluetooth off, because it's not having to communicate. And my recommendation is that you have Bluetooth off for the entire day, that you bring a USB cable for talking to the robot if you need to reprogram it. So you can plug that into your computer, plug it into the robot if they're making changes on the day of competition. I recommend against making changes on the day of the competition, but I also understand that some teams are frantically doing stuff at the last minute. So if that's the case, use USB for that, and that way you don't accidentally leave the Bluetooth on. You can only safely touch the robot while preparing to launch or when it's completely in home. And we'll get to that, the distinction between home and launch later. You can touch it while it's outside of the home or launch area, but you'll take a reduction in the number of precision points. And we'll get to that later. the thin line around any scoring area counts as part of the area, and that includes up to the outside boundary of the line. So basically, the full thickness of the thin line around the scoring area counts as part of the area. One mention here is that the west edge of the mat, I'll make my motion this way, except it may be reversed for you, I'm not sure, but the edge that's toward home, you're allowed to put a thin strip of black tape there. I don't know how that affects our ability to detect the width of that area, like during launch and whatnot. I think what we're probably going to do in competition is maybe put a few pieces of black tape down to keep that edge in position so the mat doesn't slide around too much, but not make them go the full length so that we can still see where the actual outside edge of that black border is. So benefit of the doubt, if the referee is faced with a very tough call and no one can point to strong text to settle it, you get the benefit of the doubt, but you're not allowed to rely on this as a strategy. So you're not allowed to say, ooh, we totally think this is going to be benefit of the doubt, and we're going to make this part of our strategy. The other thing to keep in mind is, as a coach, during competition, you should not be advocating for your team. So if there's a discussion about whether benefit of the doubt is coming into play, that's something the team should be discussing with the referee. So if you expect discussions on a point with the judges, like you expect the judges to be like, oh, I'm not quite sure about this, pretend to be a ref and have your team members demonstrate that they can advocate for themselves. That's part of the sort of thing we're supposed to teach them. Tournament rules. So official robot game updates override the stuff in the missions and field setup. Missions and field setup override the rules. And then your local head referee will make final decisions after a match when needed. So basically, the general rules can be overridden on a per mission basis by the missions and field setup stuff. And then the missions and field setup stuff can be overridden by the robot game updates, which can also override the rules. So that's sort of the general tournament rules. Definitions. So the robot, this is your Lego Mindstorms controller, so the brick, and all the equipment, so all the other Lego pieces that you combined with it by hand, which is not intended to separate from it except by hand. So if something snaps off accidentally, where like one of the pins breaks open or something, and that wasn't intended, then that thing that came off is still considered to be part of the robot. On the other hand, if you have an attachment for the robot, if it's an attachment that just sort of slides on and the robot pushes it out and then backs up and it drops off of the robot, that's considered equipment. I don't know. I think as far as attachments go, if it's an attachment where it's obvious that it would be really difficult to separate that attachment from the robot except by hand, then at the point that that attachment is added to the robot, it becomes part of the robot. So if you set a big attachment down on top of the robot, it's pretty obvious that there's no way for that to get off accidentally. So that's part of the robot at that time. Equipment is anything you bring to a match for mission-related activity, including the robot, but you don't bring the mission models to the matches. So if you've built them, all the little building blocks and all that kind of stuff that normally sits in home and that you move out onto the table, you shouldn't bring those with you. Those will already be on the competition tables. And there's one exception, and that's your Mission 11 model, and we'll get to that later. So equipment includes attachments for the robot, jigs. So if you have a launch jig that you align with the wall and then the robot goes in that to help align your robot for launch, that's considered equipment. The match. So when two teams play opposite each other on two fields that are placed north to north. So when you're looking at your table, you only have you basically have half of a competition set up. In a competition, there will be another table that's rotated 180 degrees and is facing yours, with the far side of the table facing the far side of the other table. So if you're facing your table, your home and launch area are in the southwest corner or the lower left from your perspective. And if you were to look across the other table, they would be in the upper right area on the far side. So what would be your northeast, but it's their southwest. Your robot launches one or more times from the launch area and tries as many missions as possible in 2.5 minutes. That is 150 seconds. Things to keep in mind, you are not competing against the other team. Your best score is what counts for the robot game, and everyone's best score is what's playing into the rankings for the robot game. One thing I like to say, and I don't know if it's 100% true, but I like to say that I think consistency may influence your robot design score. So the robot design judges, if you claim your robot is really consistent and always runs perfectly, and you don't get that, then they would be like, the robot isn't as consistent as you thought it would. On the other hand, if you've got 3 scores and they're pretty much identical for all 3 runs, and it was all on the same missions and everything, that may cause them to say, yeah, you've got a really solid robot there. And it's important to understand the overall competition scoring rubrics. So your robot game performance does not affect your overall standings in a qualifier or in the state competitions. Those are based on your project score, your robot judging, which is where you bring your robot and demonstrate it for the judges, and your core values. And then you're required to score in the top, if you're eligible to be eligible for the championship, the overall winner, you have to score in the top 40% on the robot game. But where you are within that 40% doesn't actually matter. Okay, on to field. So the field includes home, which is, if you've unrolled this year's table mat, it does not completely cover the table. And home is the area that isn't covered. The field mat, the mission models, and everything else extending to include the inner sides of the border walls. So that's the field. And we'll cover in more detail in a few minutes about what the different sections of the field are. A mission model is any Lego object already at the field when you get there. So it could be stuff that's out on the mat, and it can be stuff that's in home, but it will already be there when you get there. Don't bring mission models to matches. Of course, the one exception here is mission model 11, which we'll get to later, where your team has to build the mission model. And because every team's mission model is going to be different, that one you will be bringing with you. That's bag 11, which is a bunch of pieces and no instructions for how to put them together. Launch area. And there's a map coming up in just a second that will really help us out. So this is the mat's inner quarter circle area, and the black lines that form it extends to include the face of the south border wall, but no farther. And there's a typo here. I guess it does include the mother. It doesn't include the white band of sponsor logos. So the area that says FIRST and Lego Education and all the other sponsors is not part of the launch area. And so if we look at this map of the table, and I don't know, does this let me draw? Annotate. Cool. I can draw now. So this is the field, and this whole thing is the field. Everything inside the inner edge of the border walls is considered the field, the border walls of the table. This area here is the mat, and so this area here doesn't have any mat on it, and that becomes home. So home is sort of where you keep everything that's not being used at that instant out on the table. So in past, people had carts or bucket or bins or whatever to put their stuff in, you can use those to bring your stuff to the table, but then you got to put it all in home. Then there's the large inspection area and the small inspection area, and those will get defined or discussed later. So the large inspection area is, if this here is the launch area, this is the border of the launch area. Maybe I can change this color to red. It'll show up a little better. So if this is the border area of the launch area, if you extend that line to the other border wall, everything above that is the large inspection area, and everywhere below that is the small inspection area. And basically, you're going to be required to show that all of the mission models that aren't out on the table, and your robot, and all your equipment, which is your attachments and everything else, can fit in either the small inspection area or the large inspection area with a 12-inch high cap. And we'll get to that later. So the goal of this is that, I don't know if you've noticed at the big competitions, but a lot of teams have huge attachments. As long as the attachment could fit in the launch area, they could have a dozen large attachments and just keep swapping them out. No more. And then the launch area is this quarter circle. So the other distinction was, before, when you were coming back from a mission, you wanted to get your, basically the launch area was the same as where your robot needed to come back. That's not true anymore. So now you launch from the launch area, but then when your robot comes back, it needs to make it into home. And again, we'll discuss this some more later. The inspection area only matters during that initial proving that everything fits inside a given volume. Once you're done with that proving to the refs that everything you have fits either in the large inspection area or the small inspection area, you're allowed to spread out through home, but you're not allowed to take stuff off the table and go put it in a bin. So anyway, so there's that. Any questions on this one? I'll give people a minute to unmute, because this is a huge change from previous years. Okay, I'm going to continue on. Let's see, can I get the annotate thing to go away and make this active? Oh, maybe I should clear the annotations. Clear. There we go. Okay, so launch is whenever you're done handling the robot and then you make it go, and launching needs to be done from within the launch area. The home and launch being distinct is new this year, and we'll keep coming back to that because there's a number of returning teams. And even for the new teams, it's important to understand the distinction. Come on, go to the next one. There we go. Interruption. So interruption is the next time you interact with the robot after a launch. And by interact, meaning physically touch the robot. Since you can't remote control it, the only way you're going to interact with it is to physically touch it. A couple things that are important here. And also note that first thing is, note that this definition means that if your robot gets all the way back to home and you start touching it, that's considered an interruption. That's okay. You can't launch from home, so that means if you want to send your robot back out, you got to move it into the launch area and launch. You're not going to take any reduction in points for interrupting it at that time because it's safely in home, but it's considered an interruption. They had a bunch of, in RG13, Robot Game Update 13, there's a bunch of new stuff. Things that are completely in home can be stored, handled, and shifted around any way you like, anytime after inspection. So the robot can be out on the table driving around, and you can move stuff around within home. You're not allowed to take it out of home. I don't think you can technically move it out of home toward you over the boundary, over the wall, but you could lift it up really high, move it over, and set it down. if the robot comes back, in 1 year we had a judge tell us that if a robot came through what was called base back then, before you have home and launch now, if it came through base, it couldn't then drive back out unless you actively launched it, interrupted, launched it. That's no longer the case. So the robot can drive into home, and if it can interact with stuff that's in home, if you put them in the place for it, so as it's arriving, it's going to grab them. As long as you don't touch the thing it's interacting with while it's interacting with it, as long as you don't touch the robot, that's not considered an interruption. So the robot can come into base, grab something, drive back out without doing a formal launch. But if you touch it while it's in home, sorry, I said base, I should have said home. If you touch it while it's in home, then it has to be an active launch. If the robot is on the way home and you think its entry is going to be blocked by something in its home, like it's driving in a direction you didn't plan on it, you can move that thing out of the way so the robot can safely make it into home, as long as the thing you're moving out of the way was and remains completely in home the whole time. You're not allowed to lift it out of the way and pull it back over the wall. You're not allowed to push it out over the field or over the mat. But as long as it stays in home, you could lift it really high, because home extends up to the stratosphere. But you have to make sure that it stays within those invisible walls, and then you could set it back down someplace else. And reminder, the launch area is not part of home. You cannot touch anything in the launch area between a launch and the next interruption, except to remove a stranded object as allowed in RG09, which we'll cover later. So having a pretty fine-grained understanding of the rules and these updates is important. And then it's important for your team to be thinking about them as they're practicing launching and practicing running the robot. Any questions on this one?
Yeah, I have a question.
Shoot.
So the team starts and they have to have their robot and everything in the small area when they start, or the large area. But then can they reshuffle all the stuff once it's after it's been verified that it fits in that area?
Yes, yes,
Okay.
yes. Once the refs have said, yep, everything fits, you're good, then, so at that point, this is with the implied permission from Rule 22 and clarification here, things completely in home can be stored, handled, and shifted around any way you like, any time after inspection. So that includes between inspection and the start of the match. But they have to stay in home.
Right.
Except for the stuff that you're putting into the launch area for that first launch. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
I had a question also. You had mentioned a launch jig or something for your first launch, and I haven't heard of that before. Is that something that you can buy or make, or is there like a standard one that can be used, and then can you put it in and out, or how does that work?
Any launch jig has to be made completely from Legos. So it's not something you buy. Generally, if you're using one, so for instance, say you want your robot to launch at a 45-degree angle. That's kind of hard to aim precisely. So maybe you make something that has a bunch of Lego pieces that you slide up against the wall. The thing you're making has to fit completely within the launch area. You align that with the wall, and it has a little section in it that the robot slides into. So
focused on impeachment. CNN senior.
You're breaking up. Hello? And the other thing I will say is this, that launch jig has to fit within the inspection area along with everything else during your inspection. So the advantage is to having really, like elaborate jigs that they've made out of Legos is going down this year because it's cutting into your space for attachments or your space for mission models or your space for whatever. It looks like A. Cooper is unmuted, but Emily was going to say.
Yeah, this is Allison Cooper. I didn't introduce myself earlier. This is year 10, I think. Which is,
and this is like the biggest changes in a while.
Yeah, these are pretty significant. I wanted to throw this out. The question about the jig. I spent probably 4 years trying to convince the kids that eyeballing it does not work. And so I finally just ended up with a decree. Eyeballing doesn't work. There are exceptions, but generally you need to start it in some solid way or they're going to be really frustrated because it will not repeat itself. So the jig or the wall or some way that they can physically have it up against something to make the thing consistent is a big deal.
I will say that this year that's going to be a lot harder because you don't have an easy physical thing on the west wall. You've only got the south wall.
Yep.
And actually, from my experience, because of wall variation, the walls are not always perfectly straight. They can be warped a little. I've actually gone to strongly encouraging the kids to have pretty close to the table long straight pieces of Legos and aligning with the grid and teaching them how to ensure that their head is directly over it so that they don't get a parallax offset and they can make sure that it's really straight, because wall variation can knock you off otherwise. So I've actually sort of encouraged them to move away from using jigs, but to get really good at just aligning with the grid and knowing, oh, it's always this grid line for this launch, and then just practicing that. So there's sort of two sides to that. And especially this year with the size restrictions, I think we're going to see fewer jigs. But for like a 45, it might be helpful to have a small jig that you align with the grid and that aligns the robot. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and move on if that's okay. So another big change this year, the precision tokens. These are 6 red discs on the field. In the past, they were called penalty tokens. These are now worth points when the match starts. So if you interrupt the robot before it gets completely into home, the referee will take one of those precision tokens away. You start with 60 points from this. So as I read the rules, you could have a robot, put it in the launch area, the clock goes off, and you just sit there for 2.5 minutes and you'll get 60 points, which is a change from last year. And the points, we'll come to this later, they drop, like you lose 15 points for your first precision token, I think 10 for your next, and then maybe 10 and then 5, 5, 5 or something. So if all 6 of them get taken away, you lose all those 60 points. So you still can get a 0 score, but negative scores are now impossible, which I think is a win. Transport and cargo. Transport and cargo. So when something is purposefully, strategically being taken from its place and or moved to a new place and or being released in a new place, it is being transported and is called cargo. When the object is clearly no longer touching whatever was transporting it, which would be your robot and possibly a piece of equipment that is associated with your robot, transport is ended and the object isn't cargo anymore. So if you lose the thing out on the field, it's no longer cargo, although they sort of call that stranded cargo later. And the other thing to keep in mind is that transport and cargo doesn't refer to the robot itself. And remember that if you put an attachment on your robot and it's sort of not easy to separate it except by hand, if it's only intended to separate by hand, that doesn't make it cargo. That makes it part of your robot at that point. Okay, so before the and one other thing on that definition, note that flinging something or rolling it or sending it away from your robot, it ceases to be transported cargo at that point when it's no longer in contact with the robot / equipment, but I see nothing that rules out flinging. Or rolling. So before the match timer starts, you will have at least 1 minute to prepare. Frequently you will get more. I think 1 minute seems really short given the inspection area stuff and verifying all the models, etc. But do try to be efficient during the time before the match timer starts. verifying that the table is set up correctly is really important. So this is your chance to ask the referee to check that mission model setup is correct. So one of the things that I do with my kids, and they kind of enjoy it, is I'm a malicious ref. I will make subtle changes to the models so that they don't work properly. And then I'll have the kids, I'll do this while the kids are out of the room, I'll have the kids come back and they have to figure out without touching the models what's wrong. So they can ask me as the ref, they can say, hey, can you do this with the model and put it back? Or can you, bump this or whatever? Because that's the way it's going to be in a competition. Your kids aren't going to be allowed to touch the mission models out on the table. They can touch the ones that are in home, but they're not going to be able to touch the ones out on the table. And if you're relying on a mission model behaving correctly, I strongly advise having your kids figure out, how can we have the ref verify that the model works correctly? We, in the past, have been affected by mission models that were sticky, too much friction in the model. They were incorrectly aligned. They were missing critical pieces that were hidden from view. Pieces that were in an orientation that blocked the operation. So there was a mission model once that had a bunch of horizontal pieces loaded in it and you couldn't see them. And then they had to shove out one at a time from the bottom, and they had been loaded all vertically. So there's no way to shove that and have it come open. They're just accidents refs make, and your team's responsibility is to verify that everything on the table is the way they want it, or is correct. So it's fun to play malicious ref. And the other thing is they can calibrate light and color sensors anywhere they like. So they can move their robot out on the mat and calibrate a light or color sensor on the mat, as long as they're not bumping mission models when they do it. Okay, so then the next thing before the match timer starts is that you have to show the referee that all of your equipment, which is your robot, now, and here's a thing that it occurs to me that I'm not sure about, is all the mission models that were at the table, I'm gonna say that that's not your equipment. Because if we go back, and I'm just gonna bring this up on the other screen to read from it, definition 2 was anything you bring to a match for mission-related activity, including the robot, is your equipment. But the mission models that are already there on the table aren't your equipment. They're part of the table. And since it just says equipment here, I don't think, so all the building block things, the red, gray, white, and blue ones, and then the sustainability improvement and the bat, all of those I think you could shove to the other end of the home area, and still have your stuff qualified for the inspection area. I expect, having just noticed this and wondered about it, that there will be a robot game update on this to clarify whether those mission models have to fit within your inspection area, or whether you can just put them in the other inspection area during inspection. But my reading of it currently is that you can put it in the other one. I don't believe, and again, I would think that there may be a clarification on this coming, I don't believe you're going to be allowed to take the models, mission models that you're not using off the table. I think they're going to have to stay in home someplace, but that you can shove them as efficiently as you want into a corner. So the other thing that's really important about this is that it must fit under that imaginary 12-inch ceiling in either the large or the small inspection area. So there is no all of home inspection area. It's either the large or the small. If it fits in the small inspection area, you get an advantage. For every mission where you score points, you get 5 additional points, except for mission 14, which is the precision tokens mission. And for mission 2, which is the crane mission, you get 10 points. So that tells me that if you scored points in every single mission, you could get 70 bonus points by using the small inspection area. But if you're not going to hit that many missions, the benefit is less, and so there's not as big a reason to use the small inspection area. After you pass the inspection, you can put your equipment anywhere you want in home for storage and adjustments, and you can put some of your stuff into the launch area for the initial launch. And again, calibrating sensors, asking the referee, just like in the previous one, 18. Any questions here? Moving on. So the other thing is you should have you're only allowed 2 technicians at the competition field at once. So you're going to start with 2 technicians. You can keep the same 2 technicians throughout the match, or you can choose to have a technician step back and another technician come forward. One of the things that we've done as a team in the past few years is we've sort of settled on a model where we cross-train a group of kids as technicians, but for a given match, only 2 of them will be there. And generally there's a primary, the person who's hitting the buttons, and then there's an assistant. And we try and train everyone who's going to be a technician to be both a primary and an assistant. And then what we typically do is rotate them out from match to match. So they're going to have the practice, the 3 competition rounds, and then they're also going to have the demonstration in front of the judges. So that's 5 opportunities for your primary and assistant. And then we have the kids decide who do they want to be primary and assistant for each of those launches, trying to balance out fairness, etc. Strongly recommend doing a lot of practicing and having each pair practice as they're going to do it on the table, so that the assistant and primary sort of know each other. The rest of the team has to stand behind. There's a line, we make a box for the rest of the team to stand in. And so the rest of the team practices observing, mentioning things that may be missed, letting the technicians roll. If there's an issue, the technicians are the primary people dealing with it. If there are emergency repairs needed during the match, other people can step forward, but hopefully that's not going to be the case. The rest of the team should understand that technicians do sometimes make mistakes. That's okay. A lot of things that go wrong on the table are not the technician's fault. It's variation in the table, it's unreliability in the programming or whatever. Other things, they can cheer. They should be cheering for the other team. They should be positive and supportive, etc. On to the next slide. So launch sequence. So the launch sequence is that you put your robot and everything it's about to move or use as arranged as you like. That robot and everything that it's about to move must be completely in the launch area. And my understanding of this is everything that the robot is touching basically has to be completely in the launch area. Because if you're using a jig, I think the robot is using it. Now, the one thing that's sort of an exception to this, when we saw in that robot game update, is if the robot's going to drive out of the launch area and then come back into home and grab something or interact with something, that thing can be in home, but when it's launching, it shouldn't be interacting with that thing. It shouldn't be touching that thing. And it must be at launch time, the robot must be completely in the launch area and no taller than 12 inches. No part of it can be above 12 inches tall, or 30.5 centimeters, which gets you an extra 0.2 millimeters, which probably isn't that valuable. When the referee can see that nothing on the field is moving or being handled, and both teams are ready, the ref will start the countdown for the first launch. We typically say ready, set, lay, go. The beginning of the last word or sound, so the L in Lego, is when your team can hit the button to launch the robot. And then the robot goes out and does something, comes back. Hopefully it comes all the way back into home, at which point, if it's completely in home, your team can interact with it, move it around, put it back into the launch area, get everything ready, and launch again. They don't have to wait for the ref on the subsequent launches because it's part of the 2.5 minute period. So during the match, your goal is you are not allowed to interact with any part of the field that's not completely in home, except for launching. If equipment breaks off the robot unintentionally, you may pick it up immediately from anywhere. So that's equipment, part of the robot, not we lost something we were transporting. Launch area stranding. So things that are stranded partly or completely in the launch area can be taken into home if you wish. This is a robot game update. And when we get to Rule 29, we'll also come back to this. But let's assume that you were bringing something back, and I don't know if there's anything on this field this year that is a bring something back situation. I don't see it, which is also a huge anomaly. In previous years, I guess the only situation, and even that I don't think would clearly directly produce a scoring condition, would be if you were bringing back the inspection robot thing, the inspection drone, to put on a different attachment. But if you're putting on a different attachment, it doesn't directly produce a scoring condition, so I don't think that would affect it. So the idea here was that if you've got something that's partly in the launch area, you don't want that to be in the way of a subsequent launch. You can bring that back into home if it's stranded there. But it has to be partly or completely in the launch area. And if the stranded thing reaches outside of the white logo arc area, so that's the area outside of the launch area, then you're not allowed to grab it. So if it's so far, it's a huge thing and it's stretching across that border. During the match, don't cause anything except the robot to move or extend out of home, even partly, except to launch. Except if something accidentally crosses out of home, you can take it back. So if you bump something out of home that you didn't intend to, just bring it back, don't panic. But practice trying to stay within home. You shouldn't be taking advantage of that. It's not an accident if you planned on doing it. So anything the robot affects or puts completely outside the launch area stays as is unless the robot changes it. So one of the things that you'll do a lot when you're developing is, oh, let me reset the mission model and try it again. You're not allowed to do that during a match. If you cause something to go weird with a mission model out on the field, you're not allowed to say, oh, we're going to try it again. Let me go reset it. You can launch your robot again, but you can't go interact with that mission model. So one of the things that I recommend is that as you're getting closer to competition, you practice playing it as it lies. It's sort of like golf. You've got to, that's the way it is, play it as it lies. Think about how do you want to react to that. And a valuable thing there is teaching your kids that, especially as they're practicing launching later on in the season, when something goes wrong, keep going through that 2.5-minute practice match. Okay, what would you do now? What would your next move be? Because thinking about how you want to react when things go wrong means you're more likely to react positively when that happens in real life. You're not allowed to take mission models apart unless the mission asks you to, and I can't think of any mission models this year where they need to be disassembled. During the match, this is another one. Do store all your equipment and anything the robot brings to home in home. Again, it doesn't say anything here about the mission models that you're not planning to use. So that's an area where I'm kind of curious about that one. I'll see, maybe there'll be a robot game update. And this, I've repeated a robot game update 13. So remember, during the match, you can't set things on the floor, on a cart, you can't hand them to a team member, you can't set them on the field, etc. They need to stay in home. And this kind of levels the playing field. And also, you're not allowed to have stuff sticking over the walls. So you're trying to keep everything within those invisible walls extending up to the stratosphere. Interruption procedures. What time is it, by the way? 10:10. We're doing pretty well. So if you interrupt the robot, you stop it instantly. and then calmly pick it up for the next launch. So where was the robot interrupted? So if it was completely in home when you stopped it and picked it up for the next launch, then no problem. If it wasn't completely in home when you did that, you lose a precision token. Couple caveats with this. Robot Game Update 6 says if a new scoring condition is produced by the strategic timing of an interruption, meaning it mattered within a second or two when, or less than a second, say, when you stopped the robot, then, and if that's obvious to a referee, then you don't benefit from that mission. You don't get a score. If you're pushing something out onto the table, and the idea is that you're going to stop the robot right as it's in the right place and pull it back, that doesn't count. If the robot comes to a stop there and you decide, okay, now I'm going to grab the robot, you're okay. Mislaunch, if you interrupt the robot so soon after launch that it hasn't yet reached a launch area perimeter line, you will need to relaunch, but you will not lose a precision token. So the advantage of this is, and it's an exception because it's not completely in home. Let's assume that you realize that you've gone to launch the robot and you're like, oops, we hit the wrong software. If it hasn't yet gotten to the perimeter line, that quarter circle line, you can grab the robot and stop it and relaunch it, and you didn't take a precision token. So that's nice. Or if you realized, oh, it wasn't aligned properly, as long as you stop it before it crosses the line, you're okay. Oh, one other point on this one. In previous years, there was an update that said that you could kill the robot out on the table. Like if it was driving and spinning its wheels and you were done with the match, you were allowed to stop it and not move it, and that was considered legal. This rule doesn't actually speak to that because it says, I'm assuming that that's no longer legal. That if your robot's out there driving around bonkers, if you reach out to stop it and say, okay, we're done, that still counts as losing a precision token. We may get a robot game update on that. Just something to be aware of. Interruption with cargo. So this is pretty similar to last year. So cargo is something that's being transported. It's not part of the robot, but it's pushing building blocks out or moving something around on the table. It picked up the inspection drone, it's moving the inspection drone, or it's taking the bat out to go put the bat someplace. So the rules here are, and the RGO5 is actually an easier way of understanding. If you have to interrupt the robot out on the table because it went in the wrong way, and say it's carrying the bat, if the cargo came with the robot from the latest launch, so if the bat was with the robot when you launched it, you get the cargo back. If the cargo is completely in home when you interrupt the robot, it was bringing the cargo back and it gets all the way into home with the robot, actually the robot doesn't have to be all the way in home, just the cargo, then you get to keep the cargo. Otherwise, the referee takes the cargo. So if you drove out there and picked up the inspection drone and then interrupted your robot, the referee gets the inspection drone. Any questions there? Hearing no objections. Stranded cargo. So if an uninterrupted robot is driving around out on the field and the cargo gets detached from the robot, you let the cargo come to rest. And the guidelines here are, if the cargo came to rest completely in home, then it's yours to do with as the team wishes. If it's not completely in home, you leave as is, except that there's an exception now. If it's partly or completely in the launch area, you can bring it into home. But if that produces a scoring condition, and I can't think of anything on the table that would produce a scoring condition this year, then the score doesn't count, but I don't think that's going to apply this year. And then finally, this exception to rules 22 and 29 does not apply if the stranded thing reaches outside of the white logo arc area. It has to be, so if you had something that was so big that it was partly in the launch area and partly outside of the white logo arc, so that band, which is like this wide, then you got to leave it there. Any questions? Interference. Do not negatively affect the other team at the table except as allowed in a mission description. If you, your team, or your robot prevents another team from completing a mission, the referee awards them the points for that mission. So you're not supposed to mess with the other team's table. With the exception that in mission 1, you can be battling at the top of the ramp. We'll get to that later, but you're not allowed to put a barrier up. You're only allowed to do it by the robot bumping the other robot with respect to the flag points. And we'll cover that when we get into the missions. Field damage, if robot separates, dual lock, or breaks a mission model and clearly benefits from the damage, missions benefiting will not score. Also, you're not allowed to reattach the mission model. So if you knock a mission model over, you're not allowed to reach out there and put it back down. One of the points here is dual lock can separate. Also, you've probably noticed that the mat can sort of lift and bubble a little, which can cause stuff to move around. So you want to minimize how much you rely on the dual lock. I don't know what would happen if you bump into model A, knock it over so your robot can keep driving in that direction, and then succeed in interacting with mission model B. I don't know if that's going to count as clearly benefiting. That's kind of going to be up to the ref, but my assumption is any damage could void a mission or any other mission that's on that sortie, on that run, that launch out of base. Probably if it happens on the way back, then it wouldn't benefit you. So if you drove out to do a mission and you successfully did that mission and your robot's driving back and crashes into something and knocks it over, and the robot either makes it back to home or not, I don't know. Anyway, but my assumption is if you interrupted at that point, then your first mission is still considered to have succeeded. I don't know if you'd lose a precision token for it bumping into something, knocking it over, separating the dual lock, and then successfully making it into home. That'd be up to a ref. At the end of the match, as the match ends, everything must be preserved exactly as is. So if your robot is moving, stop it as soon as possible. So if your robot is still out on the table and you can tell that the countdown is happening and you can hear people going 3, 2, 1, you want your technicians hovering over the robot to hit the stop button on the robot immediately as the match ends so that nothing changes on the table. And then your hands are off. You've stopped the robot, you stand back, and your team and the ref will go through all of the scoring, and you don't touch anything until the ref is given the okay to reset the field. And this is kind of weird because the refs are the ones resetting the field. But I think when the ref gives the okay, there may be table resetters, and that means then you can start lifting your robot off the table. If you left stuff out on the table, like your mission model 11, grabbing that, etc. But most of the actual mission model resetting, the refs will do. So with that in mind, also end of match, definition of independent is not touching any equipment. And remember the definition of equipment, which is anything you bring to a match for mission-related activity, including the robot. So your robot, any attachments, but also anything that you're pushing around on the table that is something you brought with you. Okay, so this is the one. So the definition of supported in the original rules is 100% of its weight is held up and kept from falling. And then a few weeks ago, they issued RG11, which distinguished between supported and supported only by. And the text reads, it shows a picture, as you can see, of a cup filled with water that's on a book that's on the table. And it says these two situations are scored differently. The water is supported by the cup. And note that the initial definition of supported, or the definition of supported, is 100% of its weight is held up and kept from falling by whatever it's supported by. so the water is supported by the cup since 100% of its weight is held by the cup. The water is supported by the book since 100% of its weight is held by the book. And then it says the water is not supported only by the cup nor the book. And to my mind, maybe what they mean to say is, therefore the water is not supported only by the book. I find this rule really confusing, because to my mind, well, the book is not only, the cup is not only supported by the book, because the book is supported by the table, and the table is supported by all the things going down. And I've had some email exchanges with the rules people, and they're standing by these rulings, and I'm thinking it makes some of the missions unscorable. Thoughts?
So for like the apartment complex thing, you can pick up the apartment, knock over all the things, and set the apartment back down, and it's supported by the legs still? Is that where this one's coming from?
Well, no. What I'm worrying about on that one is that for the building stability one, or whatever it's officially called, but I know what you're thinking about, the white apartment complex thing.
Yeah, the one with the 4 blue legs that are standing.
Yeah, the 6 blue legs, safety factor. Yeah. By this ruling, it's supposed to be supported only by the blue beams, but the blue beams are supported by the pins that they're attached to, and the pins that they're attached to are supported by the frame, which is supported by the dual lock. And as I read this, well, that means that in this demonstration, if the water is not supported only by the cup, then that would pretty much make that mission impossible. So that's why I'm like, as I said to Becca, I'm glad I'm not a head ref, because I feel like I would have to override part of this RG11 in order to score missions. I understand what they're trying to get at. I just don't think this text says that. I think the point there is that that the blue beam, I mean, my understanding is the blue beam shouldn't be resting on something else. And that 100% of the weight of that top tan and white apartment complex needs to be supported by those blue beams. Okay. And we'll sort of cover more of that as we get to the other, as the missions that it might affect. So final scoring 35, only the final end of match condition of your field is evaluated for scoring. So this year there are no methods by like there were last year. It's only the results that count, with the exception that if you went out there and touched a mission model to do it, obviously, even if the end of match condition is evaluated for scoring, that mission doesn't count, because there are other rules that say, no, if you interact with the mission models with your fingers, that doesn't count. Then on to scoring.
Hey, real quick, Toby, I have a question.
Yeah.
Just thinking on the last couple of rules you've been reading over. So are they judged, or is it important that the end of field conditions are in a certain format, such as, a lot of times they're always going for that last mission. So if they're trying to do something and it's not successful and the robot's kind of spinning out of control or going the wrong way, is that negative points? Is that like a bad thing? Are you saying at the end of their attempt, they need to be able to have control of their robot?
No. If they get to the countdown, if it goes to 0 and they hit stop on the robot, they don't lose a precision token. But if 20 seconds before the end of the countdown, the robot is spinning its wheels, pushing into the wall, my reading of this year's guidelines is they can't just hit stop and say, okay, we're done. Does that make sense?
So they have to keep trying until the end, or you would hit stop?
Well, if it came back to home, they don't have to keep trying. Or if the robot stopped on its own, they don't have to keep trying. But in previous years, there was an exception that if your robot was obviously going haywire and you wanted it to stop, you could stop it and leave it. And you wouldn't take a penalty disc, because they were penalty discs back then. My reading of the rules this year is, if your robot is obviously misbehaving and the countdown hasn't finished, the 2.5 minutes hasn't finished, you can't just hit the stop button on the robot and we're done. You can, but you'll lose a precision token, is my reading.
Okay, but you could wait till the 3, 2, 1, and then press stop, and it would
Yes.
be okay.
And you wouldn't lose the precision token. And in fact, when you get to the 3, 2, 1, 0, they want you to hit stop.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you'll probably get to it eventually, but the bridge one is one I have a lot of questions on, if if we're supposed to end there, or that one that's one that I have a lot of questions on.
If you want to get any points from the bridge one, yes, you're going to have to end there. If your robot is driving away and you're like, oh, it just hit a flag, I'm going to hit stop now. My ruling is that you'd still get points for, you might not even get points for being on the bridge at that point. So your robot has to be pretty much fully autonomous on the bridge. If it stops being if you stop it strategically on the bridge, then I think you're not going to score any points for the bridge. You'll score for everything else, and you'll lose a precision token. It's going to be interesting. And the bridge is interesting for other reasons. Okay, so scoring 36. The referee discusses what happens and inspects the field with you. And you means the team, not the coach. Mission by mission. If the team and the referee agree, a team member signs the score sheet and it's final. If the team and the referee disagree and can't come to an agreement, the head referee steps in and makes the final decision. But all of these discussions are between the team and the ref. The coach is just sitting there on the sidelines or standing back and watching this happen. So it's good to have the team practice being assertive without being confrontational. It's good for a coach to pretend being a ref, like, I'm not so sure about that. Why do you think this should? I recommend having your binder of rules or your engineering notebook with the updates stapled into the back there with them, so that they can flip it open and point to a rule or point to an update. The refs should have that as well, but having the team be able to flip through and quickly say, what about this, gives them more agency. And so if there are points that you consider to be likely areas of contention between the team and the ref where they're going to disagree, role play it ahead of time. Okay. Scoring 37. As before, only a team's best score from regular match play, not the practice, counts towards award/advancement. If there are playoffs done afterward, those are just for fun. So remember, you're not competing against the other team. Effectively, you're competing against all of the teams, and your best score is what counts. And my obvious caveat is that I like to think that consistency might influence the judges for robot judging, but it's not going to impact. Actually, it could. If you tie on your number one score, as this points out, then your second best scores are used to break the tie between two or more teams. And then if there's a tie on the second best, then they use the third best scores to tie. And if that's still not settled, then the tournament officials have to decide what to do. Consistency possibly affects your robot design score. So the big changes for 2019 are the inspection areas. There is no cooperative mission. We'll get to that later. There's actually a competitive mission, which is like, whoa, where'd that come from? And that precision tokens increase your score as long as they stay on the table. And if they get taken away, it's reducing your score, but it's not a penalty. You start with 60 points and then work your way down. So those are the big changes. Okay, table rules. This, unless they've updated the PDF recently, shows what the table looks like. I did notice that they didn't update the PDF to show that the mat is now smaller than the surface of the field. So I didn't put that picture here. Oh, one quick thing on this. Note that it says that the tables could be anywhere between, and I will try to annotate. There we go, between 2.5 inches and 3 15/16, which is actually almost 4 inches. Wow. I don't think we have any that are almost 4 inches tall. That's interesting. This says 2.5 and 3 15/16, but then this says uniform 3 plus or minus 1/2 inch, or 77 plus or minus 13 millimeters, which 77 plus 13 would be 90, which doesn't match this, and 77 minus 13 is indeed 64. So I should point that out to them, that this has another inconsistency. I would go by the 3 plus or minus 1/2 inch, and I believe the Alaska competition tables tend to be 2x4s, which make them 3.5 inches. So clear all drawings, and now I can hide the annotations and go on. Come on, let me hide annotations. Okay, so building attaching models. Using the Lego elements from the challenge set and the building instructions, you build the mission models. Estimated time for one person to build all the mission models is 6 hours. If you're really, really good at Legos, it will go faster. Especially this year, it felt like the build went faster than previous years. When I did a set for competition solo, it took me about 3.5 to 4 hours. But I'm also do a lot of Legos. I strongly encourage the teams to build the mission models, but the coaches should double check everything with a fine-tooth comb. It's really important. If you have a mission model that's incorrectly built and your team spends the entire season interacting with that incorrectly built mission model, and then they get to competition and the model's correctly built, their robot probably won't work and they'll be really bummed. The dual lock, you put it sticky side down. You don't have to cut the dual lock in half at all this year, which is nice. So the process I use is just as shown here, put the sticky side down on the squares with the X's. Then carefully, just using opposing fingertips, press down sticky side up another piece of dual locking. You won't press it down all the way, just enough to get it in position. But if you put your finger all over it, you'll get oils on the sticky stuff and it won't work as well. Then align that mission model super carefully and press it down really hard, which will both press the dual lock into itself and adhere the sticky part of the dual lock that was facing sticky side up to the bottom of your mission model. And start squishing around. You're trying to get that adhesive to set as well as you can. I'll frequently leave it there for a number of minutes before I try and remove it. It mentions when you're pressing the model down, always use the lowest solid base structure. Don't press from the top of the mission model, which has a tendency to crush the mission model. And then when you're lifting, if you need to remove the mission model from the mat, I always put my fingers down around the base and then sort of work the bottom of the mission model up. I'll peel from one side a little. You can't see my hands, peel from one side a little. And the other thing that's really important, and this is an area where I will frequently step in instead of having the team do it. It can be really hard for kids to accurately position mission models that aren't close to the edge of the table, because they can't get their head directly over the top of the mission model to look straight down. And if you aren't looking exactly straight down, you get what are called parallax errors, which is where you're seeing something, you know, the thing where you move your eye side to side and your finger jumps around. It's the same thing with the mission models. Even short adults can sometimes have issues getting them positioned exactly. So that's just something to think about. It really becomes an issue on the competition tables where it's really hard to get to the middle models because you can't come to the back side. The north side is blocked by the other table. So with that, let's start moving into mission. I probably should move mission 1 to the end. In fact, unless anyone objects, we'll come to mission model 1 or mission 1 at the end, because it's the one that's going to have a lot of discussion. So we'll jump to mission 2, which is the crane. So if you haven't seen this one, I'm going to go ahead and start moving around, I think, which means you won't see me as much. And hopefully no one will get nausea. So I start by showing how to set up the table. So hopefully this will work if everyone can see the crane. Okay, so I've taken this blue unit. There are 4 of these. 3 of them go in base, and 1 of them comes here and gets positioned exactly. There's a square here on the mat. It gets positioned exactly there. Usually this will be in some position like this maybe, or whatever. So the first thing you do is you wheel up this. I don't know if you can see here. The normal way humans want to wheel up is to wheel with the top of the string going over the top of the wheel, but that's not actually how it latches. So you have to rotate the wheel. Oops, the hook came disconnected. There's this one unit that looks like this that has a little hook on the top, or a little, not a hook, but a ring for the hook. And then this wheel here, if you all can see, wheels up like that. See how I'm wheeling it with the string coming, I don't know if you can see from that angle, maybe a little tricky, with the string on the bottom. Oops, I just slid the table mat a little. Comes all the way up. And there's a little doohickey here that basically pushes down and engages this gear here. There's a pawl here, little beam that tucks into that and latches it. And when you push this down, it pushes this lever here away from the crane. And then you're supposed to rotate. So this crane, I'm going to move this back a little if everyone can see. So the crane, as it rotates like this, you'll see that this beam here goes back and forward. And so you want it to be the arm rotated all the way clockwise. So this is clockwise as you're looking down. So that means the arm is pushed all the way to the north. So that's the initial setup for this. Okay. And then, are you guys able to switch back and forth between the video and the presentation? I'm assuming yes. Becca was covering that earlier. So then the scoring guidelines for mission 2. So the first one is if this hooked unit here has lowered any distance from the guide hole. So if I move this to here, let's see, how does that look? And I can tip it down just a little. Hopefully you can see that. So you can see that it hasn't lowered from the guide hole yet. But if I pull this arm back, pulling it toward the south wall. Oh wait, that's the turning one. I'll do this one. It lowers, and it doesn't have to lower all the way. It just has to lower a small amount. Although, as you can see, it's pretty sensitive. You barely bump that thing, and this thing wants to lower. So I'm going to roll it back up. So that's the first guideline. Okay, and you get 20 points for that. Second, if it's supported by another blue unit, which you could do either by pushing this here. Let's get that in position. So you could push this here and lower it. That would get you an extra 15 points because it's independent and it's supported by that blue unit. I'm going to go ahead and wind it back up again. I'm not going to wind it all. Well, I might as well wind it all the way. Another way of doing this would be if it started in this, it starts in this position. Let's check that it's engaged. Okay. If I pull this all the way toward me, or toward the south side of the table, and push this, and that would also qualify as independent. So you get an extra 15 points. You get 20 points for lowering and 15 points for being independent and supported. The maximum number of points you can get for this mission would involve, a second, boom, let's get that in position, verify that's good. Oops. it is the most sensitive mechanism that really has to engage. There we go. Let's rotate it that way. Either if you took another blue unit and put it here, or if you were to say have your robot push this blue unit into this position, and then it can interact either with this lever. It could actually, there's nothing that says it can't just push on this, although that might be more or less likely to release it. But basically gets it positioned above that, and then we release it, and that gets you another 15 points. So if you get all the way to that, you get 50 points for this mission. Okay, any questions? Hearing none, moving on. Inspection drone. So, let's see if we can see the inspection drone. So the first thing is that the picture that's in the actual game guide, if you look at the picture on your screen and you look at this inspection drone, you'll see that they are subtly different. In fact, if you look at the two pictures on your screen, you'll see that they are subtly different. Whoever took the photographs had the model misbuilt. So the building instructions were updated, and also the original building instructions were incorrect. They were updated a while ago, so unless you grabbed them a long time ago. But basically, the pins on the bottom of this, these two little protrusions, should be on the short side of this, not on the long side. And you'll see that the map drawing here has the 4 circles with the long axis going this way and the 2 lines indicating where the loop is. So it goes like this. So that's the initial setup. And then the goal, I'm going to lift this up just a hair. The goal is to come in and somehow grab this and put it up here. And it must be supported 100% by this axle on the bridge, which they have labeled axle A. And I see nowhere else where A is defined, which I thought was interesting. So there's that mission, and that gets you 10 points, which isn't a huge number of points. By the way, the crane, the one we just did prior to this, is the one where you get 10 extra points if you are in the small inspection area instead of the normal 5. So there's inspection drone. This one is pretty straightforward because it starts pretty close to this, but it does require picking something up and leaving it there. And you can't, this, if you had if you ended the match with something helping to support this here, that doesn't count. You can't have something underneath it like this. The inspection drone has to be supported 100% by this axle. Okay. On to the next one, design for wildlife. So I'm gonna grab from it starts in base, but you get a bat, and the bat is hanging from a perch. And you will notice that if you look at our mission 4 tree, that our tree has different colors on it than your tree, and that's because Lego gave us, there are 2 bag 3s, and we'll call them bag 3A and 3B, and they gave us 2 3As instead of a 3A and 3B. So we had to backfill from existing pieces to build a number of the mission models, and then the kids are like, we got a ton of pieces left over. Well, first they figured out they were missing pieces, and then they were like, well, after we backfill, we have a ton of pieces. And I went, those are all the pieces that were in the first bag. So they're sending us new pieces, but that's why these are different colors. Yours should be brown here and brown down here instead of gray. So the goal here is to put the bat supported by the branch, and they label it B, although I don't see where B is defined on this tree. So there is a bat supported by the branch on the tree, and you get 10 points for that. This one you get to bring from base, which makes this mission a little easier. So you can have an arm and drop it there. I think if you push the bat far enough back, I think it's pretty hard to get it to stay on this part. And once it gets to that, it's no longer supported by the branch because some of it's, well, it's bumping up against this. I would say that the branch is only this piece here. And since it's slid down and it's being supported by this green piece back here. I don't know if you can see that. I would say that's no longer supported. So it's really going to be this horizontal section here. And basically, again, 100% of its weight must be supported by this piece there. Okay, this thing is called, this set of branches is the tree, I guess. So mission 5. So the ways to score this are if a unit is independent and supported by the tree's large branches, you get 10 for each unit, and small branches 15 for each unit. So if if the robot manages to bring this and set it like that, then that counts. My reading on this is that you can't do this. The second one is no longer supported by the trees. Well, no, it is. It's not supported only by, but it is supported by the branches. So independent means it can't be attached to something else. But I think this would count for having 4 units in the large branches, which would be 40 points, because this one is in the end supported by these branches. And really, yeah. And then if you manage to stick stuff in the small branches, that would count. Whoa, that would count. And you could stack stuff and you get 15 points for everything over there. So any questions on that one? Okay, so this is a situation where the whole supported versus supported only by becomes important. Note, independent here means it can't be touching equipment. So I can't have this here and then have the robot touching this. If that's the case, or an attachment from the robot is touching this, then it doesn't count. Nothing else beside, it can only be allowed to be touching the tree and other units. Any questions? Oh, I don't know if you guys can see all the way up as I'm stacking. Okay, on to the next one, traffic jam. So give me just a second. I'm going to rotate and then walk around the table and move this into position. And I think that's good. So this is the traffic jam. Fans of Inception will like this mission. So you set up initially like this with it flat on the table. I do notice that these blue pins like to get loose as kids interact with the model. So it's worth checking that these blue pins down here that attach the traffic jam thing to the hinges stay in place. So they lift it up. Its moving part, this is the moving part, has to be independent at the end. They can obviously be touching, well, the robot and the equipment can be touching it while it's lifting up, but at the end, it must be independent. You can't have something bumping up against it, holding it. And it needs to be supported by its own hinges as shown here. And the one caveat on this is I would expect that if these separate out a little like this, that I don't think that that will disqualify if they're in this position. Well, then it's no one. Well, you know, it occurs to me that touching the south wall might mean that it's not independent. I don't know. So as these separate up, this has a tendency to flop over a little farther. So I would be careful on that one. I would say if it's touching this border wall, it may not count. So if these pins separate out a little bit, and as long as it doesn't separate out so far that it touches, you're probably okay. But if it separates so far that it can touch the border wall, that might void the scoring condition. Any questions? Okay, moving on, the swing. The one thing about webinars that's weird is not getting any visual eye contact or whatever. So Mission 7, it sets up like this. The wheelchair is on the swing body. This little thing here lifts up. So you pull it back, set that up. And if the swing is released, they get 20 points. So boom, there's 20 points. Okay, mission 8, the elevator. So this one, let's see, I'm going to position this a little to the side and then try to adjust it. I think that's good. Okay, so the first thing is that the picture in the game guide is wrong. It shows this, and that is not how you're supposed to set it up. That's how you score. This is the correct. So the blue car is up. These yellow, I don't know what we want to call these. Call them the yellow gear arcs or something, are facing west. They are facing back toward home. These little white dots should also be facing home. You'll see that when you mount this model on the table that there's little guides that show where these little white dots will be. If your kids build this model backwards, it can be tricky to get the blue pins that the white dots are on back out of the model. I have found that using one of the normal beams and sort of snapping it on has a lot of friction, and that can help pull that blue pin out. Because they're the little stud pins. And there's a little box here that's on the table that's supposed to represent this yellow gear arc being in that position. So now, scoring conditions. So you get to score one or the other. You don't get to score both. So the first scoring condition is that if the elevator's moving parts are independent and supported only by its hinges, as shown in the following position, blue car down, that gets you 15 points. This is where I say, well, RG11 says that it's supported by the hinges, but the hinges are supported by the frame, and the frame is supported by the mat, so it's not supported only by the hinges. But then there would be no way to ever score this mission, so I can't believe that's what they intend. So I would sort of ignore the supported only on this. The primary thing here is nothing else is allowed to be touching this mission model when you're done. You can't have the robot being here, or you can't do this. So the next thing is balanced. If you can get this thing, and it's hard to do it by hand, if you can get this thing to balance like so, which is the hardest thing. It's hard for me to do it by hand. I'm really going to be impressed if teams score that. Then that qualifies for an extra 5 points. But this, that doesn't. Technically, it's not touching equipment because these are mission models, but it's not even supported by its hinges. 100% of its weight isn't on the hinges because some of its weight is on this mission model. So that doesn't count. But there you go. There's your 15 points. Okay, so that's mission 8. And I think I even have the whole supported only by definition here. Again, coming back to it, I can't believe that's what they intend. They claim that's not what they intend, but I still think that's what they've written. But I'm going to assume that you can actually score mission 8, and I'm going to assume we can score mission 9. So setting up for safety factor. The first thing is get this oriented correctly. So the point for correctly is, if you see my picture, I think mine is mirroring, but hopefully yours isn't. You'll see that the pink is on the left of your screen, and then the double thing here should be close to the pink here. The wider area that doesn't have the 2 bars close together is over here at the end near the non-pink, and this is positioned carefully. Then what we do is each of these beams, they're not actually technically vertical. They're slightly tipped toward these white pieces because you snug them a little. Then this, which is symmetrical, It gets positioned carefully in between those. And then I snug the beams back again to make sure everything is kosher. Okay, so now scoring. If the test building, this whole thing here, is independent and supported only by the blue beams, and some beams have been knocked out at least halfway, which I declare to mean this is not halfway. It has to get past 45 degrees. So that is barely halfway, but would count, that's definitely halfway. So this would get you 10 points. This would get you another 10 points. If you manage to move this one back here out of the way without it falling and get it halfway, that would get you another 10 points. That's 30 points. I don't see any way of moving more than 3 beams and really getting this thing to be supported only by the blue beams. Even technically supported by the blue beams, because again, that is that nothing else is, again, excluding the RG11 mess. I was playing around with it last night and tried pushing these all the way down like this and setting it here, and I managed to accidentally get it to sort of hang in this position without sliding down, where it's hard to see. It wasn't even touching this gray frame underneath it. And I haven't been able to replicate that since. It was like, wow. This just wants to slide, and at that point, some of its weight is no longer on the blue beam, so that doesn't count. And I don't see any way, I mean, if you do this, it's gonna fall to the, well, maybe that's a stable position. But, so maybe you could do, oh, nope, there's some weight down at this corner. I don't see a way of getting more than 3 beams on this, but maybe there's a magician out there who can do it. But again, RG11, technically, blue beam is supported by the pins that they're attached to, but then it becomes unscorable. Any questions on mission 9? Have I lost everyone? I'm going to carry on to mission 10. So let's get this set up initially, and let's see. Let's open this up just a hair. So the initial setup is you flip this over, and then you slide this as far as you can to the east. So this is the initial setup for this mission model. You got these white legs pushing up like this. Note that these white legs can move like this. It's like a dual hinge. Go like that. So, and then you tuck it in as tightly as possible. If at the end this structure is standing and is independent, nothing else is touching it, and is supported only by its hinges as shown, although again we get back into the hinges are supported by the mat, ignore that for now, this is 20 points. Again, I'm assuming that they will come to some understanding on RG11 that lets us score all these missions without feeling like we're ignoring it. So that's mission 10. Mission 11. The innovative architecture. And let's see, I'm gonna move this over here, and then I'm gonna go grab the bag with the pieces. So, oh, it's bag 10, not 11, sorry. So mission 11 uses bag 10. I don't know if you can see these pieces. So all of these pieces, these white and clear and gray pieces, and these white pieces and a couple gray, and these red pieces and white pieces, all of these pieces are available for your team. Your team designs a structure clearly bigger than a blue building unit, and then that's further refined to just say some measure of it needs to be at least as long as a 4-stud Lego element. So at least 4 studs long. It doesn't have to be 4 studs in all 3 directions. It does say, it says built only from your white Lego bricks, but then says it needs to be built from the stuff in these bag 10s, but you can use the red and gray elements that are in these bags. And it says bricks. So I don't think you could get away with a single brick, but you could get away with 2 bricks. If it's completely in any circle on the mat, then you get 15 points. So the circles include, there's a black circle. I'm assuming that we can see that. And there's a black circle and a red circle and a tan circle and a couple black circles and a white circle. So there's a bunch of circles out there. Up for a second. If it's completely in any circle, you get 15 points. If it's partly in any circle, you get 10 points. One of the things that they sort of say in some of the, that the idea is that the structure you build is supposed to be related to your project, but they do mention that you don't have to defend your decision in any way or explain how it's related to your project. So really, you can just build whatever you want and go put it out there. And I think you're supposed to bring it with you to project judging, maybe? I don't know. So you don't build it during the match. You bring it with you for competition. So this is the one exception on the mission model thing where you bring it with you. So any questions on this one? Moving on. So mission 12, design and build. This along with mission 1 are the ones that are really sort of a little confusing and complicated to understand. So first one. So this involves, let me get this stuff out of the way. So these are all a huge array of the mission models that you will build. And we've got red building units, we've got tan building units, we've got white building units, we've got blue tiny building units, and we've got these that will come into play later. So your goal is, so if there are any circles with at least one color matching unit completely in and flat down on the mat, you get 10 points. So what that means is if you look out here, these are black circles. You can't color match to those because you only have red, tan, white, and blue. But this is, assuming, can we see that? That's a red circle. So if this is completely in and it's flat down on the mat, this has to be the bottom of my stack. Because it's red, and this circle is red, I get 10 points. If I also manage to put a tan unit out here, I don't know if you can see that, and a white unit out there, they'll show up on the so let's see, there is tan unit, this is a tan circle, and white unit, this is a white circle. And it does mention that the blue circle is not part of mission 12. So, because I was just about to say, wait a minute, the only blue circle I know of on the map is the one for the crane. But no, you don't get 10 points for this because the blue circle is not part of this mission. But putting those 3 units out there, you get 10 points for each circle. Then we get height. So so it says an independent, let's see if we're in position. So an independent stack is a stack is 1 or more building units with level 1 touching flat down on the mat and any higher levels touching flat down on the mat. So, or flat down on the, I can't see off to the right, but I think, oh, on the level below. Okay, so, and it only has to be partly. So this I wouldn't get the 10 points for being completely in color matched, but this I would. This, I've now got, this stack is 2 units high. Even though it's made of one piece, the level is each of these blocks. So this counts for 10 points for the red one, and this counts for, well, it counts for 10 points for the red one for being in the red circle. It counts 10 points for being 2 levels high, and this counts for 10 points for being 2 levels high, and they're independent. If I then come over here, if I do this, now it's a bridged stack, I'll get 3 times 5 for this, but I won't get independent for these. On the other hand, if I manage to stack this like that, and it's just barely balanced, now I get 10 points for this, and I get 15 points for this, plus the 10 points for being color matched in the circle. If we build a nice hefty stack like this and manage to get that out there, I don't know if we can see all the way to the top, then this stack is getting me 15 points for height, plus I get 10 points for having red completely in the circle and being at the bottom of the stack. And this one I get 25 points for because it's 5 tall and it's partly in a circle. Note that this doesn't qualify me for color match because this one isn't at the bottom of the stack and completely, it is completely in the circle, but it's not at the bottom of the stack. And you can be stacking in the other circles on the map too. So you've got a ton of these building units. I expect a lot of work pushing building units out. And there's nothing that I see that says you can't build some sort of structure back in base and then try to, and they don't have to be oriented in a specific orientation. You can see that in some of the pictures that, well, there's a stack that's 6 high, that counts for 30 points. On the other hand, it used a lot of units. The one thing that their diagram shows that I'm not quite sure on is that it shows 2 units touching each other like this as being independent. You can see that in the third diagram. It has the red stack of 2 levels and the other stack of 4 levels. And as a result, it qualified for 10 points for the red being in, plus 10 for the red being too high, plus 20 for the other stack. So for this one, I think independent, as long as there's no supporting going on between the stacks can be touching each other and still qualify as independent. But this, they're no longer independent stacks. It's one stack. It's called a bridge stack.
Hey, Toby.
Questions?
Yeah. What? Can they push out the, I guess, like the flower garden on top of the buildings, or does that have to be independently?
I don't see any reason they can't. So let's go on to mission 13. Okay, so the sustainability upgrades are if you have any of these. Can you see these 3 beautiful units? Oops, it's hard for me to see the screen because I have it angled down a little and I have to look in that tiny little square. So if I push the stack of like, oh, this is kind of a nice orientation, flipping things upside down to make it stable. If I pushed this out into position, my read is we get 10 points for being red within the red circle. Then we have 1, 2, 3, 4 levels, so we get 20 points for that, so that's 30. And then we have this thing that's an upgrade, and it is independent and supported only by a stack, the whole stack, and it's at least partly in a circle, which it is, and then we get an extra 10 points for the upgrade. Now, and you only get to count 1 upgrade per stack, so you can't do you can't do this because that occurred to me. But I could do, that's 1 stack. If it's a bridged stack, then it would be, I wouldn't get to count this other one. But because they're independent stacks, I can count both of these sustainability upgrades. And from the picture, there's no support going on. So the definition of independent there is that they're separate stacks. Questions? Is that beautiful picture showing up?
It is.
Okay, so mission 14. Just a second, I gotta find, I don't know where my red discs are. So mission 14, as per normal, or as normal, we're here. Let me see if the red discs are over here. I don't know where the red discs are. But normally you would have 6 red discs down here. And then each time you interrupt the robot, they take a precision token. And they count how many precision tokens are left. If you have, so this picture is a little confusing. You see the 60/5, but really it's the 6 colon that's up above. So if you have 6 left, you get 60 points. You lose 15 when they take the first one, so you end up with 45 points with 5 left. Then you lose another 15 for the second token they take. So for 4 tokens left, you get 30 points, then 20, then 10, then 5. If there are no tokens left, if they pulled all 6, you get 0 points. Any questions there? And let's go back then and do mission 1. Okay, so mission 1, attachment. So the recommendation for attaching this is that you very carefully disconnect this first, and if this pin stays behind, that you pull the blue pin, and I don't know if you can see that, and stick it into here so that both of these blue pins are here, because it's easier to put a stud in than it is to put the cross in, because the axle you have to line up. Then, assuming you can see, this gets aligned, and the alignment on this is a little, yeah, it seems obvious that it would go where the X's are, but then things don't line up perfectly. So the location for the dual lock on the mat is not perfect for this. If you line it up, you end up with it about like this. If you're lining up over the X's in the way that makes sense, then you take this thing and you snap it back in, and then you check. And at this point, I don't know if you can see, but there's a red dot here, and there's a red dot here, and I'm nowhere near lined up with those perfectly. So then you sort of separate this, and you try and get the leading corners of this gray ramp thing here lined up, or sorry, in the center of those red dots. And that's really clearly shown on the drawing. And then up here at the top, you make sure that these move freely. Now, when you assemble this for your table, one of the things they recommend, and I'll see if I can position this camera, is, let's see, let me come this way. So you can use these gray supports to sort of help level this area, because I put axles into these pins. Another thing that might be beneficial is to put a little bit of extra plywood here to support the legs on the far side. In competition, this piece here, if I lift this up a little, this piece here will separate, and there'll be another full ramp that comes in and snaps into position. So there's a full ramp on both sides. It's all one connected ramp. So that's what that's going to look like in competition. And you want to make sure that these flags move freely, that when you press this blue thing, the flag lifts up. Okay. And it mentions here in the setup to center it over the north wall, substitute wall, using the support axles to help support heavy robot. I found putting little bits of paper in there were helpful. But in competition, it'll be supported on the other side. I don't know that there will be support axles under it in competition. That's an interesting question. So you might be better off putting, extending the table underneath it and putting some dual lock there and using that to simulate. So your robot drives up on the bridge and it's supported by the bridge. And remember that the definition of supported is that 100% of its weight is on top of this structure. So it doesn't count to just get a little wheel up on top of it. The whole robot has to be supported by this structure. If that's the case, you get 20 points. If the robot is, and the robot includes any equipment that is a part of the robot that is not intended to separate from it except by hand, so an attachment would qualify if there's no easy way to remove the attachment, or there's no way for the robot to get loose of the attachment without you doing it. The robot drives up here and somehow lifts the flag any distance, so even that would qualify. Doesn't have to be all the way up. It just has to be obviously lifted some distance. You get 15 points for each flag. So if your robot is wide enough to hit both of these, you get 30 points, 15 for each flag, plus 20 points for being on the bridge. So that's 50 points. And you can only get flag points if you get bridge points. You have to be completely up on the bridge. You can't come over here and push the flag up with an attachment arm and get points for the flag without being on the bridge. You have to be on the bridge. But you could drive partway up on the bridge and then have an attachment that comes down and pushes those up. Rule 31 allowance. It is okay and expected for robots to collide while trying to earn flag points. And it says when clearly only one robot is holding a flag raised, only that robot scores for that flag. But I read that to mean that if two robots are pressing on this, then it qualifies. On the other hand, if I have a robot that's pressed this part way and the other robot presses it farther and the blue beam is no longer touching the first robot, then only the second robot would score, is my reading. I don't know if you could see that. The idea is if they're both touching this blue beam and pushing down on it some, like they're resting on it, then they both would get points, is my read of that. And you're not allowed to drive up here and put a barrier in place to prevent the other robot from coming up. So you're allowed to clash, but you're not allowed to put a bridge barrier in place.
Are you allowed to roll up and leave an attachment on the field? And then,
if the attachment is still attached to your robot, so it's part of your robot, then yes. But if you're leaving it behind, then no. And remember that to get any points, your robot has to be on the bridge at the end of the match. So I think mission 1 is going to have to be the last thing you do. Does that seem clear?
Yes.
yes.
That mission 1 will come at the end, and your robot needs to be up on the bridge at the end. It's sort of, if you remember from 2 years ago, there was the one where you had to hang from the structure. Maybe that was 3 years ago. That was a similar one, except that there was no colliding with other robots involved, hopefully. But the other thing is, your robot drives up on here, and the other team may come up on here and bump your robot, and that's legal. Thoughts? The other point on this one would be that if you designed your robot so that it steered its way onto the ramp and drove up the ramp and just kept going forever until you reached out and hit a button, I think that would be a violation of the strategic interruption update. So I think that I'm going to stop the robot while it's on the ramp, I think would A, lose you a precision token, but B, I think the act of interrupting the robot while it's on the bridge, unless it's immediately after the countdown. If it were immediately after the countdown, you're fine. But if it's during the middle of the match when you hit the stop button, I think you also lose points for mission 1.
Is the ramp part of the bridge?
Is what?
Is the ramp considered part of the bridge?
I'm assuming yes. I'm assuming that the whole thing is the bridge. I don't
Got
think it's just this little section.
Thank you.
Yeah. So basically, the robot is on this thing, is no longer touching the mat in any way, and isn't touching like the tree. I think if you're bumping up against the tree sideways, you're fine. But if you're resting on the tree, so if you got up on the bridge here and the other robot came over the top and pushed your robot off so it was sort of half on this ramp area of the bridge and half on the tree, I think you'd be losing your points. Thoughts? Okay, I'm gonna jump to the end. I had a little bit on strategy here where I sort of go for mission selection. One of the things I mentioned, the teams with experience all know this, but the rookie teams sometimes think they have to complete all the missions. And I like to just say nobody completes all the missions. It's true occasionally you have teams that complete all the missions that, go to worlds and all that, but they're the exception that proves the rule. Nobody completes all the missions. Efficiency. So you want to sort of get the biggest bang for your buck in terms of how many points do you get versus how difficult is it to complete the mission and how long does it take to complete the mission. So one of the things that's a really useful thing for the team to discuss is which missions are the ones we want to attack first, which are the easy missions that'll get us some points and shouldn't be too difficult and shouldn't take a lot of time. Time is a really valuable resource in a match because you only have 2.5 minutes. So pick the low-hanging fruit. Reliability. I have a whole discussion with the team about consistency versus luck. I am jumping back to my other screen so I can see what notes I had here to talk about. Give me just a second. So consistency versus luck. Luck favors the prepared. So I've seen in competition where a team had an unlucky thing happen. Something got stranded just before it entered base that they needed. It had a bunch of pieces in it that they needed to load into an attachment for dispersing. Luckily, it stayed out there. They launched their next sortie, and then on the way back from their next sortie, it got bumped into base, all the way into base. So they got it. And then they had to load pieces into this attachment frantically. And luckily, the kid doing that had been loading pieces into that attachment all season. There's no way I could have loaded the pieces under pressure as fast and smoothly as he did. It was a flawless launch. And yeah, so the more preparation you do, the better off you are when things break your way or don't break your way. The bad news, if you have an 80% success rate on each of 4 sorties, and we define a sortie as a launch from the launch area that goes out and carries out 1 or more missions. It's sort of a military term for like an aircraft leaves and goes out and carries out some stuff and comes back. That's a sortie. If you have an 80% success for sortie A and sortie B and sortie C and sortie D, that means that your probability of success for all of those sorties is only 40%. The good news is if in that same situation, you have a 40% chance of succeeding on all of those 4 sorties, over 3 matches, there's an 80% chance that you will get all 4 of them in 1 match. But it never seems to work out that way on the competition tables, because the competition tables are always a little bit different than what you practiced on. And so inevitably you've built assumptions into your robot and your programming that work really well on your table and don't work really well on the competition tables. Also, I noticed that this year's mat seems to be a little slipperier than previous years. That could just be my impression. And that'll affect reliability. So as far as selecting missions, I also discuss a thing with the kids about sortie design. So if you're trying to complete a lot of missions, each time you leave base or leave your launch area on a launch and come back, that takes time to drive across the table, to drive back, to prepare the robot, to get it oriented, to hit the buttons and launch it. So doing multiple missions on a single sortie is more time efficient, but it's frequently less reliable. Whereas doing a single mission in a sortie, I'm going out, I have this one focus, and then I'm coming back, tends to be more reliable. And if it goes haywire and you have to relaunch, you haven't lost as much time. So those are trade-offs. The other thing I mentioned is, and this should be inter-sortie dependencies, not intra-sortie dependencies. So dependencies between sorties can be an issue. If you're depending on sortie A completing successfully in order to complete sortie B, then when sortie A goes haywire, sortie B is also blown. Whereas if sortie A goes haywire, but nothing you did in A is relied upon for B, then B is much more likely to be successful. But that should say inter-sortie dependencies. And I think that is the end of my presentation, because the rest of it is my ideas for which missions to carry out from last season. And that's probably not that valuable this season. Questions, discussion?
Hey, Toby, it's Becca here. I'm going to just share one other thing. I haven't been watching the whole time, so I'm not sure if you covered this, but this year there's a special thing where they're giving the answer to one mission. Have you heard about this? Yeah,
no.
No, from your face I can tell you haven't. So the Crane mission, they actually are offering programming and strategy guides to make sure that every team can do that mission. It's a new thing. They're going to do it every season. They're going to pick one mission to be that low-hanging fruit that they want every team to get. FLL Tutorials, I'm going to put it in the chat box here, has put together a really nice little PDF slide that has that programming. If you've got a brand new team and you want them to get that sense of success, this is a decent place to start, and shows a slightly more complicated program than just forward back. I think there's pros and cons to it. And so my sort of thought is that veteran coaches probably, you know, it's a single mission. It's not combining with anything else, and someone else has done the work. The kids aren't doing the work. It will teach them that even a set program isn't going to be 100% reliable, and a lot of the stuff that Toby's been talking about. But it's just good to know that the resource is out there. And this year, like I said, it's for the Crane mission.
And I assume it has build guidelines as well as programming guidelines, because programs without the robot aren't very useful.
Yeah, so this uses the trainer bot that's in the EV3 software.
Okay, and then I assume it also, does it fit in the small inspection area?
It does.
So that means that they would actually get, just out of curiosity, I'm assuming it's probably aiming for just lowering it. Does it try and get the blue? I'm curious.
Yeah, it just lowers it. It
just lowers it. Okay, it doesn't try and move the blue block into position and then rotate the crane to land it on top, because that strikes me, that's going to be challenging. I mean, the things that immediately, just going through the table today, that I looked at and went, no, those are the low-hanging fruit. To me, it's pushing the building units out into place. You can, the independent means that if you have an attachment that wraps around them to push them into place, that attachment needs to come back with your robot. But you could have like arms on the front of the robot that hold the bricks or hold the building blocks in a position and push them out onto the table and then drive back. So, oops. No, I'm still on this. Okay. So, and the innovative architecture one, you know, there's 15 points there, but these, you could have stacks going up, and as long as you can smoothly push them out and leave them even partly in the circle, you're going to get points there, especially if they're tall, and especially if they have sustainability upgrades on them. I mean, the upgrade only has to be on top of one unit. So you've got 3 sustainability upgrades, and if you can get them on a unit pushed out into a circle here and a circle there and another circle, then there's some points there.
Yeah, but if you do those early on, if you're a new team and that's all you do, that's fine. But if you do it early on, you've littered your field. So
correct. So you probably want to do the other sorties first and then do those. Yeah,
Right.
yeah. But it wouldn't. But if I were even coaching a advanced team, my instinct would be to say, get those figured out first.
Yes.
Plan on launching them later during competition, but get those points locked down at the beginning of the season, so that you know what your base level is, and figure out how difficult do you think it's going to be to build to adjust the robot for that, build the programming, how reliable is it, how many points can you get. The other thing is that you have a limited number of those units. You have 4 each of the red, tan, and white ones, and 3 of the blue ones. And they are actually building the scoring software. They had a thing this morning on the scoring software, and they said they've built into it that it keeps track of how many get used as the refs score and can detect if somebody snuck one onto the field.
Okay.
I don't know if it can detect by color, but it can detect if the number.
Hey,
I have to see how they designed the scoring.
Can I ask Becca a question? Is she on?
Yeah, I'm on.
Sure.
So is scoring different this year? Elaine went through in great detail, but I'm a little slow. So she was talking about how in the past it's been, you have to be 40% in an area to be able to be considered for the winner. The table run does not make you that automatically, but they changed the scoring. So now the table is worth 25%.
Yeah. So in judging, the formula of how they're going to select champions and advancement is slightly different this year. It means that, you don't have to have as high a game table score to theoretically advance. I don't think it's going to cause any major changes, especially not that people would really be aware of.
Is that, I'm curious, just because, well, as my mom would say, very. So is that in the rubrics? Is it
No.
in judging info?
It's in the judging guides, which are public. Everyone is welcome to read through them.
Judging info. Rubrics, award descriptions.
Let me look at where, I'm not sure where it is on the website because they give us.
It seems to me that the table holds a little more weight. And this is something else I've noticed, that I could just be slow. It seemed like last year we had 4 areas of competition. We had core values, the competition, the project, and then design. Whereas this year we just have project, table, and core values. It was design never one, and I just kind of made it in my mind that
No, design is there this year.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's 25% though, in that you're right. In previous years, it was the 3 judged: core values, robot design, and project, and then you had to be in the top 40%, but where you were in the top 40% didn't matter. This year, it's 4 weighted equally. So core values, robot design, project, and robot game. And so you don't technically have to be in the top 40%, but since they're looking for balance, you should probably still do. And it can affect that 25% that is assigned to the robot game performance.
Yes.
Okay. For some reason, I thought it was balanced before, and now the table has more weight. But what you're telling me is I misunderstood before, and now they're all equally the same. Yeah.
Whereas before, the table performance didn't matter. As once you hit the 40% cut, once you were in the top 40%, didn't matter where you were. Now it does actually have the potential to affect. If you're in the top, I mean, you still have to do well in core values, robot design, and project, But if you've got two teams that did equally well on those three, and one of them was in the top 5, one of them got the highest robot game performance, and the other was just over the 40% threshold, now it's an easy,
Okay. So now the table does have, it just plays equally with everything else. Okay, I had it backwards. Yeah. Thank you.
Another good thing to note, and I'm betting Elaine covered this too, but there will not be robot game tables in the judging rooms this year.
What?
Yeah, we are working on making sure everybody knows this. So normally when teams go into robot design judging, which is a 10-minute judging session in the morning, there's a table set up and they can run missions and use that to explain their programs. That won't be there this year. So they're going to have to explain their robot build and their strategy without the table.
Okay.
We will make sure that our judges are familiar with the game. But Toby, it means a lot less setup.
I know. But on the other hand, I'm like, what are the kids going to do? But okay.
Yeah, it will be pushing the executive summary of the robot game a little bit more, because I think it's really helpful for teams to have that to go in for judges. And like I said, the judges, we're going to work to make sure that they're more knowledgeable about the game so that they can ask guided questions for the kids.
I don't think that's a bad idea. I think it's good because it forces the team to be able to discuss and just not show, but actually discuss their design, and just not do a run.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I think it's also true that historically, as a table setup person, it was always first competition tables, then judging tables, then pit tables. And the judging tables, frequently had issues and made the teams worry, and it's hard to do it quickly and you only have 10 minutes. It's just surprising because it's a big change. Are they planning to do the same thing at Worlds? Is this a local decision or is this a
it is a world option. It's the first year that they've given us the option to not have tables in, and I don't think they've actually made a decision for championship yet.
Okay. But yeah, well, and remember also that, I don't know, the judges don't watch the practice rounds because you're judging in the morning, but they're going to come out and watch the competition rounds usually.
And the fact that table score is now a set 25%.
Yeah.
Has your performance play in a little bit more clearly than it had in the past.
Yeah. So I think all in all, there are some changes that I'm kind of like the bumping robots on top of the bridge. There are some like the RG11 that are giving me a little heartburn, but hopefully that'll get straightened out. But all in all, I think that the changes have been good. I really like the inspection area.
Yep.
I think that's going to force kids to be efficient with pieces, and any real world engineer knows that you don't get unlimited resources.
Any other questions out there? Oh, I see one from Emily. Oh, but it's just to me. I will respond.
Okay.
And if you're listening, Emily, it was a question about your specific table, and I can say they were ordered like 2 weeks ago. So I will find out what's going on there. Might just be Alaska shipping, but I'll follow up for you.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
And I would, having gone out, by the way, the judging stuff, it's out on the challenge updates and resources part of the resource library where you can download the challenge updates and all of that. And there's stuff down there for the judging info. And that was where I found and there's a judging FAQ that you can click on that's on the judging info page that has more of the details. And that also, on that page, there's the crane mission lesson and the EV3 solution and the EV3 program.
There you go.
Yeah.
They're kind of hidden.
Well, they may be someplace else as well, but yes. No, they're on the challenge updates and resources page down near the bottom. They're also there. Cream mission
Okay.
lesson.
And I think they're going out on a team blast this week, so you should get them
Okay.
now.
Awesome. And
oh, all right. And I apologize. My sister is finishing up a bath with my son, so I'm going to go make sure he's okay. I'll be back down in a couple minutes.
Okay. Any more questions? Comments? Discussion?
I do have a question, Toby, and I don't know if you know the answer to this. That was Becca that just left, right?
Yeah, yeah.
In the past, I know the last couple of years, there's been kind of an FLL kickoff. And do you know if there's been any plans for that?
The one in Anchorage?
Yeah, the one in Anchorage. I know the kids went to it. My kids went to it last year and got really excited.
I don't know. That's a good Becca question. My gut instinct is that there may not be one, since I haven't seen anything about it by now or heard anything about it. But I don't know. We can wait for Becca to come back and ask her.
Didn't they have one a few weeks ago?
Was there like a webinar one, or?
Oh, not a webinar. I think it was in person in Anchorage.
It may have been in person. I guess I could check my emails.
Yeah, no, I've been watching, and I know they had one for FTC. They had a big kind of a kickoff, but not for FLL. And I've been emailing Beck about it, and the only thing she said was we might be doing something, but it'll be different. And so I was just wondering if you had any insights. So.
No, sorry. I'm kind of glancing at. I might wait till Becca comes back, because she's probably going to want to stop the recording, and that way it doesn't look like we completely abandoned people.
Okay, so are we done? I had to step away. I'm sorry.
Unless anybody has any more questions, then yeah, I feel like we've covered the material.
Okay. This was very good. Thank you so much.
The problem is actually, you know how they always say, if you want to learn something, teach. Being forced to put these together is actually really valuable for me as a coach.
It was done very well. I do have a question.
Sure.
I may have covered it. I've got multiple things going on.
No,
if you fit in the small inspection area, you get 5 points extra for every mission, except for the 2 you mentioned where you get extra. Is that correct? Or did I miss that?
You get 5 points extra for every mission in which you score points.
Right.
So if you don't attempt the mission, you don't get any extra points. But if you succeed in that mission in any way, you get an extra 5 points, except mission 14, which is the precision tokens. It doesn't affect that.
And the crane, you get 10.
And the crane, you get 10 extra. Yep.
Got it. So I had that correct. That's something. I like the fact they're trying to incentivize small, because it's not. I noticed that attachments and robots kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger. In real life, things are getting smaller and smaller and smaller. Micro is where we're going, not macro. And so I find it interesting that this year they're incentivizing small. I think that's great.
Yeah, I completely agree. And the cart is a little bit of an advantage because it can help you roll stuff there instead of having to carry it, where you're less likely to drop a tub. And I forget, maybe I didn't get that in here. There is a robot game update on specifically addressing,
But I like the fact everything has to fit in home, and everything is on the table, so you don't have kids holding it behind you and walking up. And what the carts did was they allowed you to, and we didn't have a cart, we had tub. The cart just to me, I didn't really care about the carts, but it did allow you to have things very well organized and separated, whereas a tub, it's all together. It just seemed, but I didn't care one way or the other. Yeah.
We definitely, the Wolf Bites took advantage of having a cart the last couple of years. I got one from Craigslist and cleaned it up. And because they would have all their attachments on the top, and then as they were done with the attachments, they put them on the bottom of the cart. So it was easy to sort of have things arranged.
Yes.
But it's definitely it's an unfair advantage if you don't have, or a disadvantage if you don't have one. And I think that focusing on home is a really good thing. The only thing that I'm a little quasi about on home is that there's no mat in home. And that means that the quality of the table surface underneath, somebody just drew, but I can clear that. Clear all drawings. There we go. The quality of the table surface under home or in home could matter if you're pushing something back. But this is a year where there isn't really anything that comes back to home.
You know. So do you have to end at home each time? You don't launch.
Well, you don't have to end at home. You can take the precision token loss and go grab the robot and bring it back. But you lose precision tokens when you do that.
Right. To do it correctly, you have to end at home. Can you end in launch?
No. It has to be completely in home. So that's what's weird is launch. Before, what behaved like home was called base, and what behaved like launch was called base, and they were the same thing.
Yes.
Now launch is separate from home.
Okay.
And the two aspects of base have been split.
Yes.
So when it's coming back, it has to make it into home, but when you're launching, you do that from launch.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, but it gives you a much bigger area to aim for.
It does. And you don't have to come back to a corner. You can just go straight off.
Yeah. Your team may want to slide stuff out of the way.
Right, but you can be manipulating home any way you want during the, so yeah.
Except that you're not allowed to, it has to stay within home, but it doesn't have to stay touching within home. So you can lift it up, slide it over, and set it down as long as it stays within that imaginary column.
Okay.
Well, and I thought the entire robot had to be in home, so it can't like be halfway in home and halfway in launch. It has to be all the way in home to be able to touch it. Is that
correct? If it's only partly in home, then you will lose one of your precision tokens for interrupting it. So that means the last little bit of the robot has to clear over that boundary. Now, the other thing that hasn't been made clear, let's see if I can find it, is the boundary of the mat. Is that considered part of home or not? But I think it says table surface west of the field mat that includes the faces of its border walls. So that home doesn't include the thin black line on the mat. So it has to be completely off the mat. And that's again why if you're putting tape down, you don't want to put a solid strip of tape the entire way. You want to put little sections of tape.
Okay, so in the small inspection area, that includes your small home area. I didn't know that.
So the inspection areas are part of home.
Right, I see that.
Yeah, so small inspection area is the area, this is the annotations again. So you take the edge of the arc of the launch area and everything down here is small inspection area.
Yeah.
And the large inspection area is you take the edge of that arc and you go up. And so technically, I think the width of this line would be part of both the large and small inspection area, but really they're mutually exclusive.
Okay.
Because that line isn't very thick. Okay. And you're allowed, while you're being inspected in the inspection area, And you have to be under 12 inches during the inspection, but after that, you can be above 12 inches. But you can't be above 12 inches when you're launching, but after your robot launches, it could move an arm to be higher than 12 inches, right? But when you're being inspected, if it helps, you can use your hands to hold stuff in place.
Okay.
Okay. Thanks.
The kids are allowed to, you know, if you've got something where it's going to flop over, or you're trying to do a stack, or you got to push down a little on the top of the robot to make it fit within that box, you can do it. And I don't know how they're going to judge the 12-inch height precisely. Probably, yeah. But, and note that the large inspection area does not include this area. That is not part of the large inspection area.
Yes,
it's only
interesting.
this section. So home is the sum of the large inspection area and the small inspection area.
That's interesting.
And once you've been inspected, then you can spread out
right
into home. And then you can move some stuff from home into the launch area, getting ready for that first launch.
And so so your initial robot would have to fit in that small inspection area. Once you're inspected, then all of those additional building blocks, you know, the reds and the browns and the blues that come with the table, you could kind of push them all together at one end of the home, and so you have more room to spread out.
Well, my reading of the instruction of the guidelines, and this is where I was saying, this is one where I think they should issue a robot game update. It says during inspection, your equipment must fit within the small or large inspection area. And your equipment is everything you bring to the match. And you do not bring those brown and red and white mission models. Those are already there. So my reading of a very close reading is that it's only your robot and the equipment you bring. So your Mission 11 model, which is the one you built yourself, that has to fit in the small inspection area. But all the ones that were already at the table when you got there, those don't. That's
my understanding too, Toby.
Okay. So you can shove those in the other inspection area while you're being inspected.
Yeah.
What I can't tell is, let's assume you're not planning on using half of those blocks. Can you put them on the floor?
My gut says no, just from a tournament maintenance standpoint. So no.
But you would be able to, you think you could shove them all to the end and stack them so
yeah.
room area. So
yeah,
you can manipulate, your two people that are at the table can be manipulating home while, I shouldn't say manipulate, changing home around, redesigning home while your robot's doing its thing.
Yes, and they can rearrange everything in home after they've been inspected, before the initial launch. So they've got time after they've been inspected to be like, okay, now let's get everything the way we want it in home. So the inspection area only penalizes you, small versus large, for having large things or lots of things, but it doesn't penalize you into being restricted to that area for your subsequent setup and preparation and execution of the match.
Yeah, in most ways, I think you have more space than ever because you are restricted in what you bring to the table, and then you can spread out once you start going.
Yeah, well, but you don't have, if you were a cart team, you don't have that cart sitting there with,
True.
gargantuan stuff on it. But that's a good thing, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, it's one of those things where it's an advantage. It was an advantage for teams to have carts, but you can't expect a team to say, well, we're just not going to have a cart, even though it would be an advantage because, Yeah. And I'm going to stop sharing for a quick second. If I can find that. Oh, there's the stop share button. And I'm going to quickly open up just because it came up, and give me just a second. I'm going to open up the updates because that one thing I didn't put into the presentation. Make it this. And then now I can share this. And okay, so you should be able to see the robot game updates. And I'm going to, I don't remember how to zoom this. Let's do this. L and zoom. Am I still sharing?
Yeah.
Yes.
Interesting. When I go to, I'll leave it like this. When I go to full screen, it does the whole page. So, bridge barrier supported by boxes and trays. Here's RG10. You can carry your equipment to the field in any box or tray. So I don't know if that covers carts or not. When you get, it's kind of a hard, is a cart considered a box or tray?
I think we should probably ask for clarification on that, because my understanding was they were trying to get rid of carts.
Okay, so then I think I think box or tray. So bin.
The point is, you have to put everything on the field, and then you leave, and then that thing goes away.
Yep.
Or it's out there, and you could put things in and off of it. So everything has to go on the field.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's good.
And then you store the box or tray as directed by the referee. And it also, to me, says that you only get one box or tray.
Yes.
You're not allowed to carry it in two boxes or trays. So my read would be you could put everything in a box or tray, wheel the cart near the competition area, take the box or tray off of the cart, and walk with it to the competition area. I think carts may still be useful for project. But yeah. I think carts at the matches is gonna they're not gonna be there, which is net a good thing. The only benefit to a cart this year would be that you're less likely to stumble and drop it. And that you're less likely when they're standing around waiting, kids get tired, so they set the box or tray down and somebody could step on it or something. But I think that's the only, and since the rule doesn't allow a cart, I think no carts.
Okay, I'm doing a little time check here, and it is 11:58. So just 2 minutes if folks do want any burning questions to squeeze in before we finish up. And you're always welcome to send in questions. You can call me with questions anytime, and if it's a game question, the chance that I'll send it on to Toby is fairly good.
Hey, Becca, I have a question for you.
Yes.
I asked you this while you stepped away, and I'd emailed you too, if there was going to be any kind of a kickoff like for FLL this year.
I don't think we're going to have one this year. Just the time of getting sort of other things going has taken away from the ability to have a kickoff. If there is somebody out there that wants to host one, I'd be happy to help support it with some, at least advertising it. But as of now, we don't have one set up, and UAA wasn't able to put one together. So right now, the answer is no.
Silence.
Yeah. Any other questions? Maybe one that I can answer with a yes. That would be nice.
Well, actually, I've got a question, but I hope it's a no. Will there be an earthquake immediately prior to qualifier one?
We'll see.
Fingers crossed not.
That was a bummer.
Yeah.
It was a bummer, but I'm so glad we did not have to do qualifier 1 2 days after an earthquake. Because I was like, ah.
Yes.
Yeah, I think everybody had bigger things to focus on then.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, well, it is 12:01. Toby, thank you so much. I know it takes a lot of time to break down things that way and present them, but it's really valuable, and I think this recording will be really valuable for people to go back to. And thanks to everybody that actually made it out to be live and ask questions. It makes it more fun for the presenter for sure, and hopefully you know, asking real-time questions is helpful too. And I will get this posted. It takes a little bit of time to process, but I'll get it posted hopefully by the end of the day. And go back to all the other presentations that are out there. I think people have been sharing really useful information, and keep sending in questions and suggestions for webinars. We want to keep having this support out there. So with that, go enjoy your Saturdays, and thanks again to Toby.
Thank you, Toby.
Thank you.
Thank you for attending. Okay, bye.
Bye.